The commission is appointed by the Board of Selectmen to enforce the Wetlands Protection Act under the state provisions and the Milton Town bylaw governing wetlands as well. As a matter of formality, a couple of things. One, we have a recorder that's on, so that if you wish to address, and you're welcome to, or invited to address, or ask questions, or make comments, but please identify yourself first. And secondly, as a matter of formality, we always introduce ourselves. My name is John Kiernan.
Judith Darrell,
Hans Van Lingen.
Papa Doyle.
Ingrid Beatty, Kathy Bowen.
First on the agenda is an educational presentation regarding removal of contamination from the Neponset River. Sir, would you identify yourself? First of all, welcome.
Thank you very much.
for
I
coming.
appreciate it. Absolutely. My name is Chris Pyatt. I'm the project manager for the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for the Neponset River. And tonight we're going to talk to you about PCBs in the Neponset River. I have about a 10-minute presentation. And then I'm going to pass off the presentation to my colleague, Megan Cassidy, at EPA. And we're going to talk to you about efforts to investigate and hopefully move forward at some point with EPA doing some work on the site. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the background of work that's been done by the Neponset River by the United States Geological Survey, follow-up investigations that were completed by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection to define where the sources of the polychlorinated biphenyls that are in the river came from, challenges for the case development, why it's so complex, and we're going to finish with our recommendation and the pass off to EPA to our recommendation to get them involved in this case. So the first thing is, let's just get into some detail here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. You can see that okay. I'm going to point out some features of this map, and this is a map from the USGS investigation. And this is the tributary to the Neponset River known as Mother Brook. And here's the confluence right here. Some major features that are important to understand along the riverway are the impoundments. Because when you have an impoundment, the water stops and the contamination settles out.
What is that?
Dam?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the dams. No, feel free if anyone has any questions. So the first one down from the confluence is the Tilestone and Hollingsworth Dam. And then further down is an area called the Braided Channel, but there was a dam called the Jenkins Dam that was formerly located there. And right next to the estuary is the Walter Baker Dam. And the dots on this map, you will see some blue dots and some red dots. And these are locations where the USGS collected red sediment samples and blue water samples and analyzed those for PCBs. If you look on the blow-up areas behind the different dams, you will see red dots which represent core samples, where the USGS actually went down to about 3 feet and looked at the history of PCBs and sediment samples that were collected over time. So the USGS did this work from 2002 through 2006. And the results of it showed that once you got to the confluence of Mother Brook with the Neponset River, upstream, not really a lot of PCBs. Some historical levels really on the order of single-digit PCBs, 5, 6, 7, 8 milligrams per kilogram. When you went downstream...
What are the cleanup levels?
The cleanup levels, the ecological risk, you have an ecological risk with PCBs for actually far less than 1 milligram per kilogram. So when you get downstream of the confluence in the area behind the T&H or Tilestone and Hollingsworth Dam, you have PCBs as high as 200 milligrams per kilogram. So if less than 1 is a problem, you certainly have a tremendous amount of PCBs. And a little further along in the presentation, I'll show you where these sediments are piled up. Yes?
Milligrams of PCBs per kilogram of sediment?
Milligrams per kilogram is also parts per million.
Okay. Milligrams per, sounds like drug dosing to me. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes people are more comfortable with ppm. So, so this is sort of the situation when the USGS contacted us through the Fish and Game Department. We basically saw that it looked like we had a lot of contamination coming into the Neponset River from Mother Brook. So this was the USGS conclusion. Okay, it looks like there's problems in Mother Brook. Can Mass DEP do an evaluation, look into your site files, and see what the sources of the PCBs could be? And we're defining a problem area as the lower Neponset River. And when you hear me say lower Neponset River, is the area from where Mother Brook comes in to the Neponset River all the way to the Walter Baker Chocolate Dam above the estuary. How do I get rid of that? Oh, good, I'm glad it just disappeared, and I'm like, how am I going to get rid of that? So this is Mother Brook, an aerial photograph of Mother Brook coming into the Neponset River. And you'll see properties labeled on here as 1 through 5. So when Mass DEP heard about this, we looked through all our files and we looked at all the historical data for all the sites we had along Mother Brook. And upstream of Facility 1 here, we saw really nothing in the way of PCBs, almost background. I mean, very, very small concentrations. Once you get to Facility 1, we saw on the order of thousands of milligrams per kilogram of PCBs, like free phase level oils. And to identify these facilities, one was the former Ellie Mason facility, which did die casting work. 2 and 4 on this map were a former Allison Chalmers electrical manufacturing facility. This might be familiar to some folks that have lived in the area for some time. Number 3 is a facility identified as American Tool and Machine, used to be. And number 5 is a former junkyard. So a company at number 1 called Thomas and Betts did a remediation of Mother Brook from 2006 to 2011. And what I mean by that is they dug it up. All the PCB contamination from this facility all the way down to the Neponset River, they dug it up. And next to this facility, they went down 34 feet into the brook, and they still couldn't get it all. And they had to put in some barriers at that level. And for the rest of the brook, they had to go down 4 to 5 feet to get it all. But the various companies that were involved in these releases did not extend their work into the Neponset River. We only knew about the contamination in the riverway because of the work done by the United States Geological Survey.
When was that work completed?
What, the USGS work?
No, the remediation.
That was done from 2006, finishing in 2011.
Okay.
Now, is that done voluntarily or under a order of some sort?
That was done through the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, through the state requirements. So they, as part of their legal requirements through the state, did that work. But they clearly have problems that extend into the riverway, and they didn't do the work to finish the job. So Mass DEP's evaluation showed that the main sources of contamination in the Neponset River for PCBs were just in this lower section of Mother Brook, with that number 1, that Ellie Mason facility really being the major one. And I think this is actually it's a good profile because it shows you where the sediment in the river is that's contaminated with PCBs. And if you see yellow, it's between 1 ppm and 10 ppm. If you see this light orangish, it's between 10 and 100 ppm. And if it's this dark red, it's greater than 100. So you will see Mother Brook comes into the Neponset River, and you'll see a carpet of this yellow color all the way up till this accumulation behind the dam where the really high concentrations are. If you go further downstream here towards where the braided channel is, where the Jenkins Dam used to be, and behind the Walter Baker Dam, you see concentrations on the order of 10 to 100. So you have this residual concentrations of PCBs in the sediment in the riverway. And I do want to mention up front that there is a fishing advisory by the Department of Public Health, which they don't want people eating any fish that have been caught from this area, because as part of the USGS study, they actually collected fish, they analyzed the fish tissue samples, and they found the PCB problem. So it's actually into the food chain as well. So it gives you an idea of where the contaminated sediments are.
What species?
Let's see, what did they, you know what? I don't think I know off the top of my head what they were. Yeah, I've been focusing more on the sediments in the water, but I'd be happy to follow up with that information.
And the Jenkins Dam, when was that removed?
Well, what happened was in 1958, there was 2 subsequent hurricanes. Crazy, right? Like within the month of August. And the dams got wiped out. All of these 3, they got wiped out. So at that point in time, for a period of 10 years, there was no dams in the Neponset River. 10 years later, they rebuilt the Tilestone and Hollingsworth Dam, they rebuilt the Walter Baker Dam, they never rebuilt the Jenkins Dam.
Okay.
But you still have that accumulation of sediments
And are
there.
those just flood control dams, or are they used for anything else?
I believe they were put in for, I think the Tilestone and Hollingsworth was put in originally for the paper mill operation that was there, and the Walter Baker chocolate might have been related to the industrial activity that happened there over time.
So neither operates for the
None
purpose
is, yeah,
anymore?
none is
Okay.
presently operating at this point in time. So trying to grapple with how to get out here and appropriately clean this up, it's a tremendously costly endeavor. The cleanup of Mother Brook that from 2006 to 2011, that was a $14 million cleanup. So the cleanup of the Neponset River, these contaminated sediments that I've showed you, would be on the order of tens of millions of dollars. It's very complex because there's multiple sources, multiple releases over time. And it really is a task that is overwhelming for the state to manage on its own. So we called in our partners at EPA, and we're going out and talking to folks in Milton and in Boston, because we want to hopefully get people's approval, and not necessarily approval, but make sure people are, supporting the idea of EPA going out and collecting samples to score the site for listing as a federal national priorities list. And Megan is going to talk about that.
Anybody have any questions for Chris before we?
Yeah, there is a question. Yes, sir.
Of course.
Geographically, where does
Yeah,
Mother Brook
could you
join
identify
the-
yourself and use a microphone if you could?
Hi, I'm Sam Perkins from Bradley Road.
Hey Sam, how are you? Oh, should I bring a map back up, Sam?
I just wanted to know where Mother Brook joins the Neponset. What town is that
Right
in?
near Fairmont Ave in Hyde Park. Yeah, right about where the old Lewis Chemical
It's a
facility in that rough area.
It's a Dana.
What's that?
Brook joins the
Dana.
Neponset at
That's where
Dana.
Mother. Yeah.
At Dana.
And Mother Brook joins the Neponset with the Charles River.
Right.
And it was man-made in the 1700s.
Yeah, it was actually for
Yeah.
flood control purposes.
Yeah.
They dredged that out and constructed.
And I think
Mother Brook.
navigation too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I'll switch so that I'm not in your way. Here. Thank you.
Got it.
One last
Okay,
question
sure.
before, who owns the two dams?
I think the Department of Conservation and Recreation.
DCR
I
owns
believe.
both of them?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Thanks, Chris. So just for giving me a little introduction, I am Megan Cassidy, and I am out of the Boston office of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I manage the program whereby we evaluate sites for potential inclusion on the national priorities list, which is commonly referred to as the Superfund list. So just to follow on, I'm here tonight to kind of follow on with what Chris has been talking about, because a year or so ago, Mass DEP came to EPA. We work very closely kind of evaluating sites that are in the state program, and the state often asks EPA to get involved in sites, as Chris explained, that for one reason or another exceed the capacity of the state DEP, that may be for complexity, cost, or any number of other items. So again, Mass DEP did ask EPA to get involved here, and I'm just going to talk to you tonight about our involvement, explain a little bit about what the National Priorities List is, what a site, if it goes on the list, how EPA works that site through the system, and then how sites are added, and a timeline of potential activity for the lower Neponset. Again, this is just an overview of sort of our process. I'm just going to tell you, so again, as we've mentioned, the state asked EPA to take a look at this site, and we've been discussing sort of from a strategy perspective whether the site is what we would consider a candidate for federal involvement. EPA has not done any actual work in the river at this point in time. We've been reviewing work done by the state, done by other parties, USGS, and have been really looking at existing data for the time being. So, again, Chris and I and others in both of our offices have started some discussions with both the city of Boston and the town of Milton, because you sort of share the river. So we had an initial meeting, I think about a month ago in early March, and the town manager, I believe, from Milton was in attendance, and that's who invited us here, so I want to thank him for that. So again, just want to explain to you a little bit about the process, and the reason we're doing that I think is important. We're out kind of educating, discussing what it would mean if we get involved, because again, we really want to make sure people understand the process. I think the state is making it very clear that the state does not believe they can kind of proceed and investigate and get that section of the river cleaned up in the state program. So beyond the state program, they're sort of looking at us as the last resort. And often that's what Superfund is. We look at sites, are there any other ways to address them? Because if there are, that's generally a better alternative. But in this case, we believe that adding the site to the National Priorities List is probably appropriate. Again, National Priorities List is under the Superfund statute, and it is simply a list of sites that the federal government identifies as requiring additional investigation and development of a comprehensive plan for addressing human health and risks to the environment. Again, investigations at our sites determine what the context of that risk is from human health and environment, and here including the food chain. And then we develop a comprehensive strategy on how to clean up a site. So that again is what the National Priorities List is and why we add sites to the National Priorities List. Why we would add a site to the National Priorities List? Again, sites on the National Priorities List are subject to federal investigation and cleanup where appropriate. Adding a site to the NPL is the only way that federal dollars can be brought to bear. So outside of the Superfund program and process, there is no funding mechanism from the Environmental Protection Agency. So that is obviously a big trigger here and why the state has asked us to become involved. And federal resources can include monetary, the funds to do the investigation, do the cleanup, but we also bring to bear some significant expertise, including enforcement, an enforcement capacity, where we can work with Department of Justice and others to delve a little bit into parties that might have operated and created the problem and try to compel them to pay for the cleanup and or perform the cleanup. So that is a big issue related to this site. Again, the state does a great job, but they often don't have a significant enforcement capability for some of these sites. And again, unfortunately, absent the use of federal resources, and in this case, the National Priorities List or Superfund, sites like this generally go unaddressed. Again, the state, I think, is very open about that, and that's why we bring these discussions to folks to let them know it's pretty much possibly the only alternative at this point in time. This is a rather busy diagram, and we can come back to it later because it actually sometimes really helps with part of the question and answer. But this is really a schematic of the Superfund program. Sites of this complexity require, this is a long process. When sites are added to the National Priorities List, they are highly complex and they are highly expensive. So we have to assess a site, which is where we are. You'll see sort of at the top of that figure, we're assessing the site now to determine whether it is a viable candidate and can be added to the National Priorities List. And part of that, before we make those final determinations, is kind of working to see about garnering some support from communities and things like that. That's, these discussions are really about that process. If we decide to move forward with a site, we'll, kind of move down this road map, if you will. We propose a site to the national priorities list. At the same time, again, we are looking for responsible parties and trying to determine if they are still viable and can we compel them to, provide funding for cleanup. We investigate and then we remediate and, we bring a site back to, use if it were an actual property. One of our big goals is obviously to foster beneficial reuse. Clearly in this situation, it's to bring back the habitat, get the food chain back in order, that sort of thing. But ultimately, this is the Superfund process. Again, we can go back to that because sometimes it's very useful for Q&A. So I'm not going to dwell too much on how sites are added to the national priorities list, but it is federal rulemaking. EPA uses a model, if you will, where we're looking at what the contamination is and how the contamination could impact what we call targets. How does it impact people? How does it impact, fish, that sort of thing? And we use a numeric model that basically assigns every site a score. There's nothing particularly, it's a bit of a black box, but we use it consistently every site across the country so that we're, getting everybody on the same playing field. So we score a site, and if it scores above 28.5, it is considered, eligible for the national priorities list. 28.5 is not a magic number; it just was what was selected at some, a certain point in time. Sites don't, if you're a 50, you don't have a higher priority than a 90 or anything. It's just, again, that's just a benchmark that we use. So again, we score a site, then we propose it to the NPL in the Federal Register. There's some public comment, and we finalize the site if it's going down that road. Again, at this point in time, we have not done this scoring, certainly for the Lower Neponset. We have done some review of the existing data, and we've done some what we would consider back of the envelope calculations, and we feel that this is a very viable candidate and think we would be successful if we decide to proceed down that path in scoring it and being able to propose it to the national priorities list and get it into the federal arena. This is just a possible time frame. It's not set in stone. It has not kind of kicked off because it's basically, we're having these discussions now. But our goal is to try to get some general consensus from the city of Boston and the town of Milton that at least, there is interest in getting the Lower Neponset addressed and sort of educating and getting an understanding that this may be the only alternative to doing so. So, assuming we kind of get that feeling from the two communities, we would like to get out there sort of this, I would say, late summer, fall, collect some additional data to sort of confirm what we know. And start developing the score that we would need to document to add it to the national priorities list. If we are able to start that, we would be hopeful that we could propose it fall of 2018. There would be a public comment period, and then you go through that second phase and finalize it. So again, this is a bit of a process. That's why we're trying to get the conversations going to start moving forward. This is, again, sort of that necessary step before we can bring federal dollars and or resources, i.e. our enforcement capacity, to the table. So, we are hopeful that we can get this moving, but again, we also feel that having a dialogue with the folks that have a stake and would be our partners is really important. Now, the last bullet here, another reason that we have found historically that it's really great to be having these conversations with folks in the communities. In order for EPA to put a site on the national priorities list, we must have a letter of concurrence from the governor of the state. If we do not have that concurrence, we will not move forward. It's not, we won't take a unilateral position, and we won't proceed. So Mass DEP and EPA have been working very closely over the last several years, 4 or 5 years, I think, on a number of sites across the Commonwealth that we have placed on the national priorities list and have successfully garnered that letter of concurrence from, I believe, both Governors Weld and Baker. We've been working over two administrations. Yep. And I think both of those administrations, and Chris can speak to this a little bit more, while EPA does not need letters of support from the community, the governor really uses that as sort of the yardstick for whether they would provide the letter of concurrence.
Absolutely correct.
So again, that is why we've continued to develop opportunities to go out and share information with the community, to answer questions and things like that. And again, this is just another one of those opportunities for the Lower Neponset site. So that is just really quickly how EPA can become involved and why we are doing this at the request of DEP. Again, we haven't sort of made any real commitments to putting, resources into this site to start sampling and to start this process until we get a little more feedback from the communities. And again, I believe that is why the town manager suggested that this would be a great forum to, have that dialogue and answer some questions. So,
Are there any set timeframes or triggers?
The timeframes for, so currently you mean like the fall, spring thing? That
Yes.
time? Yes. So right now, so we add these sites in what we call updates. So they're federal registered notices, and it's a group of sites. An individual site can't get on their own schedule. So currently, we do these NPL updates twice a year, generally in the spring and fall. That's, again, the current policy. We have in the past, the statute actually, I believe, only requires us to do it once a year. We have been doing it twice a year, so it is possible that you get only one opportunity a year, and that's, again, where you have to kind of plan your investigations and your timing and everything so that you're on the right track. Otherwise, if you miss it, you just have to wait.
Wait a year.
Yeah,
Yep.
so.
I think it's fair to assume from what you said that one of the specifics that you would like is a letter of support from the Milton Conservation Commission, advocacy, support, et cetera. And what other specifics would you want from us or other parties in the community for this important work?
So all of any and all support, I think, is appreciated. EPA really, I will be perfectly honest with you, at this stage of the game, because all we need is the letter of concurrence, but we really work closely to build that, the support, because none of us want to be, moving forward if there's not support, because again, we just know that it's not the best use of our resources. I think the state would be quite happy with any kinds of letters of support from.
Absolutely. Often they come from, town managers, conservation commissions, anything that comes into the governor's office that shows community support that ultimately helps for this governor's letter of concurrence. Right now we're looking for a generic, okay, the communities aren't opposed to this, right, so we can start the sample collection process, because if EPA is going to devote resources to a project, they want to make sure that's money not wasted if communities don't want things like this to go forward.
Yes, at this early stage, and again, this is why we try to get, really have this conversation early on. The letter of concurrence is not due till, close to the listing. As Chris said, we usually, and I think we said this yesterday when we visited with the city of Boston, at this point in the game, I think, we are trying to gauge whether there's adamant opposition. Again, because that would certainly give us an indication that, maybe we shouldn't start putting, boots on the ground and, spending resources, but rather should.
Help me understand why there would be opposition to something that's 50 years overdue.
That is an excellent point, and I, think you're right on the money there. I will tell you, we have been in communities, not so much in the Commonwealth, but we have been in some New England communities that just feel very differently.
I understand.
So that's,
Well, I think we've known for years that there are PCBs behind the Baker Dam, lots of PPCs. But the idea was, or the conclusion or the assumption was that the cleanup would be so difficult, better to leave them alone rather than have them migrate down into the estuary or something. So can this be done effectively without making things worse instead of better?
I think that is an excellent point, and it's something that we consider in the Superfund process, and actually deciding how to remedy a situation. That is one of the actual criteria. You know, how are you, are you ensuring that you're not going to make the situation worse? Are you protecting, other receptors? And the answer is, yes, we have, we've been able to do it in other places, and you consider that, but I think the agencies have moved away from the argument of doing nothing is always, doing nothing is doing nothing. Taking precautions and addressing contamination with good engineering
You're saying
controls.
at the Hollingworth, they went down 30 feet, and still they just migrated down farther.
The
Mother Brook
Hollingsworth-
into-
Oh, and at Mother Brook, the
Yes,
cleanup?
yeah.
Yeah, well, what they've done is they've removed the contaminated sediments, and the ones that remain, they put a barrier down. They actually have secured that, so there's no more contaminant migration. Any PCBs that are left along Mother Brook, so Mass DEP and EPA to a larger level on these big cleanups are now adept at engineering solutions to make sure that we solve problems and do cleanup. So Mother Brook is now secure. There's no more contamination coming into the Neponset River from Mother Brook. The deeper contamination that they couldn't get is now underneath a permanent barrier.
Judith, two of the things that I recall against leaving well enough alone, one, when there are natural catastrophes that release it all, or large amounts of it that otherwise wouldn't be released. And second one, you want to do something developmentally, and you suddenly find that it's prohibitive to do something that's very positive for the community because you didn't do this beforehand. So you put yourself in a bind.
Yeah, I'm not in opposition by any means.
Now, I'm not saying you are, I'm
it's an
just
excellent-
explaining.
It's an excellent, and I think I think what you're getting at, it's often, right, there's kind of two reasons I think that some of this contamination in sediments and things, in rivers particularly, but even in upland, is left behind in some cases. One, right, it's complex, you need to, do some good engineering controls to ensure that you're not making it worse. But two, and probably related to one, it can be expensive to have those engineering controls, so that there's always that weighing, and oftentimes when you're, kind of looking at those two things, often the assumption or conclusion is better to leave it where it is. And in some cases, that's probably right. But when you have some situations where you've got really high, hot spots, or, areas that are very elevated, I don't think the conventional wisdom is that you want to leave all of that, in place. That, with care, with a good engineering and the right, information, you can improve the overall
One
quality.
thing that is happening here that's a change is we have some of the predators coming back, eagles and osprey now, along by the Neponset, which we haven't had, in 100 years. So you're saying the fish are being polluted by the PCBs. That means up the food chain,
Correct.
that the eagles are now getting those, and now there's a question of, spreading the pollution and possibly impacting these threatened animals. So I guess that's another argument for doing it.
Yeah, and what you do, you ultimately, if you do the cleanup or you get the engineering solutions, you allow the ecosystem to repair itself. And then you have the populations of different types of species coming back in, and you have a healthy community and a resource area that people can come back in and feel comfortable using to paddle their kayaks and canoes and feel comfortable that they have a safe environment to do so.
Ingrid? I have two questions. One, and this is not it's neither a political nor a cynical question, but I hear things about EPA's funding. Is there any sense of confidence that there will be any funds available for any site on the NPL?
At this point in time, we are moving forward with our, our work. We are always faced, so EPA's budget is a congressional appropriation. We get an annual congressional appropriation. As we all know, there, will be ongoing negotiations. We don't have information on what our budget will be. But we face each and every year the need to sit and look at what our budget is and how many sites we're looking at and what we can do in a given year. Because don't forget, at any site, we're gonna do a certain amount of work this year. We get our money year by year. We have to manage it. There is uncertainty regarding the extent of next year's appropriation and the next. But at this point in time, we are certainly continuing with our work. We have some statutory, requirements to, address human health and the environment, and we believe that we will be doing that,
All right, well, you have strong support from us because your priorities are our priorities. And it was not a cynical question. I just want to see if, take a weather report on whether or not there's any money in it.
And at this point in time, we don't know what our budget is for FY18. Congressional negotiations will be ongoing over the next couple of months, and we will work with what we're given.
With respect to the Mother Brook remediation, was that funded at least in part by the company or its insurers?
That was a private cleanup by Thomas and Betts Corporation, which did end up in a legal battle between 26 parties to pay for that, for various parties within that lower section of Mother Brook. But the problem was initiated and largely paid for by the corporation. Whether they had insurance, environmental insurance, the state is not privy to that sort of information. But it was done by the company as part of their responsibilities through the Massachusetts contingency plan.
Fair
I
enough.
wanted to, we lost.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Peter, but no, that's okay.
Can I fire it back up?
No,
Take a
that's okay.
second.
No, because I could just. But one thing, again, one of the reasons in particular for this site, I think that the state is considering that EPA may be able to bring a bit more to bear is, again, our enforcement capability. We do believe, as Chris said, that we will be able to identify at least some, parties that will be either performing and or contributing to this, to this work. So, I don't think we expect that this would be a fully funded by, by EPA federal dollars. That we would be searching. Part of the process of these sites is we do a very thorough, what we call a potentially responsible party search. That we look for current entities, maybe past entities that might have contributed, and do they have any kind of corporate liabilities, successors? So that's a big part of it, is looking to find parties that would contribute significantly, in this case perhaps, to help fund that work.
All right.
Yes.
Second question goes to the protocol. A number of years ago, in the vicinity of 5 or 6 years ago, we permitted some rehabilitation work in the Walter Baker factory site. Mm-hmm. And Coastal Zone Management came in and identified the largest and most prolific smelt hatchery in New England. It's about 300 feet downstream of the Walter Baker Dam. Mm-hmm. We have, at that time, voiced a number of concerns as to anything happening with that dam, particularly during the months of March to late June. Mm-hmm. That's very sensitive to us, mm-hmm. and it actually goes to the question that you had, Judith. We're concerned with anything leaking out of that Walter Baker, particularly at that time of year, which then goes to another question about when are you going to do your testing. Chris, I think you and I spoke on the phone, I don't know, a year or so ago, mm-hmm. about testing in the Mother Brook area. Mm-hmm. And my concern at that time was when you take those cores, mm-hmm. Is there any kind of a technique for backfilling once you pull it out? Because what we don't want, especially in the Walter Baker area, mm-hmm. we don't want any leakage of the contaminants, particularly within 300 feet of the smelt hatchery. Mm-hmm. It's just something I wanted to remind you and members of the commission that this has come up before, and I think when we last spoke, and it was some time ago, and at that time, I think the testing was on the Boston side of it. But that would still be a concern of mine, that if you can do the core sampling with some level of confidence that there's going to be no leakage, even from that. And I think from a few folks that I talked to, there is a mechanism for just kind of backfilling with sand or something. Some kind of a barrier, even for that, whatever it is, a 6-inch core or 4-inch core or whatever it is.
It would be a pretty small core, at least for the sampling, but, you know, I suspect, we'd have to look into it a little bit, but I think, there are methods to,
Okay.
to do that, but it, knowing that there's a hatchery and things in that area
It's
would
the
be very
hatchery that
important.
led me to that, not the normal.
And actually,
core.
that actually would be considered in part of the scoring, if you will.
Right.
Things like fisheries, hatcheries, things like that, obviously are areas of concern, so they kind of, are considered significantly in the model and the score as to ensuring that you are considering the impact to areas like that.
I know generally, historically, with sampling that's been done by the USGS and the state, I don't think they filled back in. You're talking about really small samples over very small areas. So you don't get really much in the way of any sort of additional migration that you would be concerned with, because you're taking samples from such a small area. So I know in the past that hasn't raised to a level where they were filling back in holes, because basically the major migration pathways that you're concerned about, or the major mechanisms for migration, are the big storms that happen, where you get lots of,
I understand, and I'm with you 100%,
Yeah.
except for,
Yeah,
this is the largest smelt hatchery in New England,
yeah.
within 300 feet, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm extra sensitive.
No, understood.
Generally speaking, this would just wash out to the ocean and dissipate in a very dilute fashion, if anything came out.
Yeah,
But I just wanted to, ring the clarion for this
Yeah, no,
particular
again, that's
Understood.
really, that is important those are things that are really important when we are considering whether a site, sort of how to score it and things.
Right,
That's
knowing
why I
that's
was
there.
noting
I hope that helps.
It does help. I was
I wanted
noting
to,
that, and, we'll be potentially looking to find that contact, to document it and things like that, because that's very important to us.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, every effort is made to try to do things as safely as possible
Yes.
for ecological receptors and as well as human receptors, to make sure we're not doing any more damage. We're just trying to make sure we get the data necessary to do our evaluations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Abutters, members of the public would like to be heard, ask a question. Sam, come forward, please.
Sam
Can you use the
Perkins
mic?
again. Can you hear me okay?
No, because there's a recorder.
Got it. Okay, so Sam Perkins, I'm out on Bradley Road. Based on the sampling that's already been done, do you have some rough sense of what your EPA score is likely to be?
I do not have I do not recall. We have a rough score, and I think, if we can confirm the data that, we've, been provided, we believe it will score above 28.5. Again, the number itself, once it's above 28.5, is not particularly, important. We don't try to collect extra data to drive the score up, because it's just not necessary. So our preliminary look, based on the information and the concentrations and things that that we've already seen as collected by the state and USGS, and knowing that there's a fishery and now this a hatchery, we do believe that it would be above 28.5 and would likely be able to be successfully, added to the NPL.
Any other questions, comments? Anything? Any other commissioners' questions? Thank you very much. We're very grateful. And how do we follow up?
Thank you.
How do we follow up with you?
Thank you for your time. I would speak with your town manager, your town official, to let them know what your position is, whether the Conservation Commission is supportive or has any reservations about this going forward. And then I think there may actually be a follow-up meeting with the town folks, the town officials. That is a possibility. But I would follow up directly with your town manager.
All right. And the second question that I have is whether or not you can envision another larger, more detailed presentation to the folks of Milton.
We absolutely can entertain that. We can, and again, that's really, these meetings that we're having now are what we like to call sort of just the introduction. We think, again, going to point to Marilyn St. Flora in the back here is from EPA, and she is one of our community involvement coordinators. When we start working in these communities, we end up, really getting to know you, and we typically kind of work with the community to consider what's best as far as what kind of forums work well. Is it a larger public meeting? Are there small neighborhood meetings? So again, we're always open to that as we start the process. Again, we do it multiple times, so absolutely.
John, if we're communicating with the town manager, could we just have an informal poll? It would be great if we could say that this is unanimously supported by the Milton Conservation Commission.
Sounds like a motion to pass a resolution that
So
we are in
moved.
support of this. Seconded? Seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. You got it.
Excellent.
Thank you very
Perfect.
much.
Thank you
And
for your
again,
time.
we'd
Thank you.
be happy
Everyone, we
to
appreciate
join
it.
the folks from Milton anytime.
Thank you very much.
I'll pull
Appreciate
these
it.
for you while you're up here.
Thank you very much.
All right, do you mind if we keep going while you're...
No, please do, please do. Just take me,
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, number 2 on the list is the notice of intent, DPW on Bradley Road. There's been a request to continue that. We have assented to that. That will be continued. Number 3 on the list is an informational presentation from Eversource regarding 800 Brook Road. Sir, thank you. I don't know how to do this. If you can use that mic, maybe I can shift back here and you can use these 2 mics. That makes the most sense, I think.
Well, I do have a couple of boards that it might make sense to put up front, so folks can see.
You go up there? Sure, we can try that. Okay.
sneak this stuff behind you so you can get out of there. Get over you.
Let's start with last year's problem and then move on to this year's problem. Hi folks, my name is Paul Bollier. I'm a licensed site professional with Pine Bond, and I'm here representing Eversource Energy tonight for a couple issues that we've had over the last couple of years on the substation down on Brook Road. That station supplies a lot of the electricity to Milton. Last January of 2016, there was an explosion in one of those transformers and a release of mineral oil, dielectric fluid, and kind of a spray pattern out the back of the transformer into some of the wetland areas here, and actually 6 or 7 of the trees caught on fire. And since then, we've determined that those trees didn't survive. We initiated under the MCP, which you heard Chris talk about earlier, which are the state regulations that govern cleanup of hazardous waste sites in Massachusetts. We initiated an immediate response action plan where we're full of acronyms and jargons in our industry. Removed a lot of soil, did a lot of follow-up confirmation sampling for both petroleum hydrocarbons and PCBs. The results of that effort were very successful. I've highlighted a few sample points here in yellow where we did detect PCBs after the cleanup at above the method detection limit that the laboratory can see, but well below.
Can you orient, we've all been there, but can you orient us as to where Brook Road is?
Oh, okay.
Where
Yep.
the pad is?
Brook Road comes in here, and
The driveway is where?
the substation is surrounded by wetlands, and in fact,
just-
the thing was built in a wetland way back.
We're all familiar with it,
Yeah.
but the public is not, and the public is watching
So
this.
the road comes up through here, and there's a gate right here, chain link fence at the substation entrance. There's a gate, chain link fence that surrounds the whole substation, concrete pad here on which the 2 transformers are situated. This is just the western transformer area we're looking at now. So that was the release that happened in 2016. So Eversource hired Clean Harbors Environmental Services to come in and essentially excavate the contaminated soil. We had 4 hits at approximately 0.1 part per million, 0.3 part per million, 0.39, and 0.135. So the cleanup standard that's protective of human health and the environment in the terrestrial sense, different from what Chris was talking earlier. is 1 part per million, so we were at 1/10 to 3/10 of that cleanup level. So that cleanup went really well. I know last time I was here, the commission was worried about whether or not anything might have gotten into the groundwater. So in the interim, we installed 4 groundwater monitoring wells, 1 on each side of the substation, north, south, east, and west. We've sampled that twice now. We have not detected PCBs in the groundwater at all. We had 1 detection of petroleum hydrocarbons at a very low level in MW4, which is the well that's located in between Brook Road and the substation, so on the southern side. So
And when were those monitoring wells installed?
last summer, we've sampled them in June of 2016 and recently in February of 2017. And we're planning to collect 2 more rounds of groundwater monitoring. Typically, we'll do that on a quarterly basis so we can characterize the groundwater over a whole year's period, 4 different seasons. Groundwater will fluctuate based on precipitation levels. Last year, we didn't have any rain. This year, we got a lot of it so far. And contamination can vary depending on where the groundwater level is. So far we have not detected PCBs in the groundwater. So,
What about, we discussed before when you and some others were here previously, that the other transformer may have been the source of a leak as well.
Part 2.
Okay.
This is the second half of the substation, so if I were to put these boards side by side with Brook Street down here, this is the eastern transformer over on this pad
Hold on
here.
1 second. We just need to get oriented, or at least I do a little bit better. So Brook Road is on the bottom here.
Correct.
So then Fontbonne High School is just directly across the street.
No, it's on the same side of the street. It's where. It's
I
to
think the high
right.
school's down here, correct?
It's the other way.
To the far right,
The other way.
You know
Closer
that-
to where you are.
You'd know better than I do.
Yeah.
Brook Road is on the bottom side. So
Okay,
and
yeah.
if you're heading left to right, you're heading towards St. Agatha's. So the first intersection you're gonna come in is Center Street. And Brook and Center is the intersection of, where
Right,
Fontbonne
right.
is.
Okay, I had that turned around. Okay.
I have an overall plan I can leave with you that shows its an aerial photo.
You know, the next time, that would be helpful to have, a blow-up of that, just not
Well,
only for us, but for the
I'm
public
hoping
to
there
see.
will be no next time.
Well, I'm looking at something from February of 2017, so.
Yeah, so that's, we had another incident with the second transformer
Yes.
more recently where the cooling fin on the eastern side of that transformer failed, and there was yet a different spray in a direction out. And this way, it was much more funneled. That's represented by this line. So again, we did another cleanup effort under the MCP. We did a bunch of sampling. This is the concrete pad with the transformer over here. And this is a containment berm, so anything that had flowed out of the transformer overland wouldn't have affected this. So everything here was affected by this spray. We removed about 6 inches of material from there, sampled 3 points in there. It actually covered one of the monitoring wells is located right there. We resampled that, and again, we've got 1 PCB hit in that area at 0.13 parts per million, so well below the 1 part per million cleanup. But in doing that, and as you guys had noted last year, there was some historical leaking from that transformer that had been going on for a while, and that transformer became unusable, so they lifted that off the pad. And we
Wait a
did
minute,
more.
the
The second transformer
second
that
transformer
failed
was,
has been replaced.
right, but that, we approved that a year ago.
Yes,
And then
they
it was
took them a
delayed.
while. It took them a while to
And
find
in
the
the
capital
meantime, there was an
budget.
incident where,
That's absolutely correct.
oh, my word.
So we encountered the historical stuff that had been leaking there, and we actually used Clean Harbors Environmental Services again, excavated that out down to a maximum depth of about 5 feet below ground surface.
So did you dig up the pad to do that?
Part of the pad was removed and was replaced and reformed with a larger pad to support the the newer transformer, which is a little bit bigger. Again, we had a
That
couple.
was discussed at the last time.
Wasn't there an issue about getting a new transformer
A
versus
new or
a
refurbished, right.
built one?
Wait, what was the year of manufacture for the new transformer?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
But some of these new transformers are 30, 35 years old. Is that correct?
I highly doubt that. If they refurbished one, it would have been a recent one.
It would be in our
Uh,
recordings from the previous meeting where they did cover that, so you're
I can
absolutely
get
on
that
top.
information
I
for
remember that
you.
discussion as
Yeah.
well, yeah.
These are old.
So this goes to my question that's paramount in my mind. I consider the remediation temporary. The long-term solution will have to be, at some point, the removal of the substation from its present location. Otherwise, we're going to be faced with this situation.
That could be, but this is between the two transformers, and they may support each other, but we're talking, what, 50% of the power in Milton? Is that approximately correct?
Again, I'm here representing the electric utility, but I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't know the details of that. I'm a licensed site professional and a professional wetland scientist, so I'm here to talk about the cleanup we did and how it affects the wetlands.
Understood and appreciated.
Yeah.
But I think we did have a conversation at the last major hearing that we had, and I think it's a very significant portion of Milton's power.
It is.
And to...
Which is why they left the second one in place.
What's
while-
that? Exactly
while they were
correct.
replacing the first one. And
But there seems to be about a 9-month span between replacing the first one and replacing the second one. And in the interim period is when the second occurrence.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, so,
The only thing I can say is they addressed the cleanup pretty quickly. We've gotten all the PCBs out of there. There's some minor hits here, 0.1 there, 0.178 here. This particular sample inside the berm, the first we ran it came out at 1.1. We ran it again at the laboratory, it came out 0.9. Overall, the MCP allows us to calculate what they call an exposure point concentration, or an EPC, where we look at the average concentration that somebody playing around in those soils might be exposed
pretty
to.
close.
And,
1.1 and...
well,
0.9.
no, because everything else was non-detected. Anything that I haven't highlighted, we did not detect it after the cleanup. So, there's a hit here or there at about 10% of the cleanup standard.
So which ones did you average?
Well,
Which ones
we
did you
did two
use?
different sets of averaging. We averaged these last year, came out below the cleanup standards. And then we averaged these this year. We're at this point done with the cleanup, done with the assessment. We haven't filed the closure report with DEP because I want to get 2 more rounds of groundwater sampling.
Over what period of time?
Over the next 6 months. The last one we did was in February 16th, I believe. So we'll sample again in May and probably in summer during seasonal low groundwater table. And then take a look at it, provided that there's no surprises there, we'll close this thing out with what the state calls a permanent solution statement, PSS. To get to your point about moving the substation, that's not anything that happens overnight.
Right.
The negotiations are
I
a number of
understand.
pay scales
But if it
above
doesn't
me.
start, it will never start.
But
Sure, and from the 2017 perspective, that's the last place you'd put transformers.
Exactly right.
But they were originally
I know
installed
they-
in the 50s. and
this was, I believe, the substation was built before the Wetlands Protection
Correct.
Act existed.
That's-
You
that's correct.
couldn't put a substation like that today, so.
We're acutely aware of that.
Is the fact that there's no guarantee that this isn't going to repeat itself. And unless we look at something beyond the short-term solution.
And I understand this is informational, and we're grateful for that, but who is the person that could provide us with the specifications for the replacement transformer?
He's a fellow at Eversource. Believe it or not, his name is Jack Rabbit.
Okay.
I can get Hans the contact information. The one bit of information I did get today as I headed out here was that the damaged transformer is still on site. It's empty, it's been cleaned out, Clean Harbor's evacuated all the oil. They're lining up the contractor to transport that on site. They did ask me to talk to you about we were here a year ago about the tree bank and how they donate to that and the process of that.
But they were also supposed to plant some
And
trees
that,
on the
they were
site.
supposed to put some on the site, and we,
American holly,
correct.
I think 7 altogether.
And they asked about that and whether or not there was a paperwork process they needed to implement with you before we did that, or if we can just move forward under the, I think we have an emergency certification that was issued for this work.
You did initially have the emergency certification, then I think we issued another permit for the long-term solution. And so the answer to your question is you can move forward
Okay.
and just stay in touch with Kathy
Okay.
Bowen. We'd like to have this.
They'll use a subcontracted landscape contractor to do that. So I'll have them get a hold of Kathy.
Right, because we'd like to move it along, get the transformer out of there. And I assume they can get a truck in, because I know we had to remove some additional trees to get the first truck that went in. We had to remove a tree in addition to the burned one, just to get the truck out.
Yeah, to lift the
Yes.
unit off the pad with the grain.
Correct.
What about the dead trees?
What's that?
The dead trees that burnt?
Yeah, they were supposed to remove those. That's also part of the order.
Well, first we're gonna see if they can keep them alive or not.
They didn't make it.
Right. The hope was that they would make it, but the last meeting was determined that they were gone.
They were gonna wait.
Right, okay, so they have to be removed.
They can cut those down anytime, and if that's okay
Removed
with
and
you.
replaced.
Yes.
They'll have the same
I think 5
landscaping.
altogether, yeah.
I thought it was 7.
No, 7, we were talking about.
Don't say no. If you say 5, he says 7. So yes.
I have a plan over there where they're marked.
Would the stumps?
5 to 7 trees got burnt.
With the stumps?
I would say yes, but Judith may have a different view.
No, I'd say yes, too.
Okay.
Sure.
She likes stumps.
I mean,
Usually, right?
You don't want-
Usually.
You don't want the stumps removed, do you?
In the
No.
wetlands, no, you want the stumps.
You just cut them off at the base.
Right.
Okay, so you did change. Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought you said to leave the stumps.
No, I said,
Oh.
I would have them removed, but I bet you have a different view when you said it. I thought
I
you were.
misunderstood
okay.
you.
All right.
That's a huge transformer. I guess,
They're big.
2 weeks ago, I went by and took a look, and
Yeah.
it's big.
It's this thing, right? This is the
And when it's
transformer.
off the pad and out to
Yeah.
where it is now, it's.
That's the one, the
bigger.
original one,
Much
yeah.
better view.
I think the newer one's bigger than that. They
Even
have-
bigger.
They have to extend the concrete pad out and pour out a
Uh-huh.
larger
All right.
footprint for it.
So then there is a consensus then that the dead trees will be cut down, but stumps will remain.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yes.
Any other questions? Audience, members of the public, any questions, comments, suggestions? Hearing none? I think we're good, but y'all talk to Hans and get Jack Rabbit's
Yep.
contact information, because we really would like to get the specs on that second transformer.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
We're grateful. Next on the agenda is number 4, request for determination of applicability, 930 Brook Road to 443 Center Street. Gas line installation. Hi, good evening. Thank you very much and welcome.
All right, thank you guys. Hi everyone, my name's Kate Rimmel. I'm here on behalf of National Grid, who's the signed applicant on this project to install a gas main along portions of Brook Road and Center Street. So here we have the project area. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this location. Get oriented. Here we have Brook Road right here, and this is Center Street down here. The proposed gas
You can
main.
almost see the transformers.
Right.
Yeah,
They're right in the corner.
that wetland is the end of the wet.
Yeah, so The proposed gas main is this red dashed line. It's right at the end of Brook Road, turns the corner, comes along Center Street. And a wetland identified in close proximity to the project is this green line right over here. So, as I said, the project involves the installation of a gas main within the existing footprint of a roadway. So we're working in buffer zone only to this wetland. Throughout the project, best management practices will be utilized, including sediment controls placed between the roadway and the wetland, catch basin inlet protection, and closing trenches at the end of each day. So overall, no impacts to the wetland are anticipated. So National Grid is requesting a negative determination under the bylaw for this work. So that's about it. Are there any questions?
Kathy, did we, yes, but let me ask Kathy a question first. Is this one that we already permitted?
Yes.
And do you know the date, or Kate, maybe you know the date of
Yeah,
the
this
original
was-
permit?
This was back in 2011.
When is the automatic renewal? When did that
This
start?
wasn't a notice of intent, this was a DLA.
Okay. I was just checking to see whether or not, if we had permitted it before, there's an automatic extension from what, 2010?
2009, I believe, to 2012.
Okay. All right, so, but this was earlier, at an earlier time, we gave a negative determination on this one?
Exactly, yeah. So this was, once again, same project, was permitted in 2011, received a negative determination. The work never got underway, but since then, there's been no changes to the project scope. So once again, seeking the same determination.
And for what period of time, construction-wise, do you think this will be open?
I'm not sure. I know they're in the bidding process right now, so I anticipate that it will get underway relatively soon.
But you don't know how long the actual construction?
The actual construction, I don't believe it was included in the permit. Let me look real quick. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can follow up if needed.
Yeah, that would be helpful to know. Thank you.
People will ask us.
Okay, definitely. Thanks.
One of the things that you just said, and I appreciate you saying it, that, you know, the erosion controls will be in place, the trench will be closed each night, which is certainly important for public safety, as well as the wetlands, and that best management practices will be used. And I appreciate that, and I salute you. But in your presentation, on the first page, that is a written presentation,
Oh, yes.
it says in the last sentence, C, attachment C, for example, of these BMPs that may be used during the project. And I was just concerned with maybe as opposed to will be. So I'm presuming that you would have no objection if we put into the negative determination, if that's what we vote for, that BMPs will be used.
Exactly, yeah, that's kind of standard language stating that the contractor has discretion as to, you know, for example, when using sediment controls, are they gonna use wattles or hay bales? But National Grid does require that BMPs are used, but like I said, there's the discretion of the contractor as to which.
We don't mind the which, but we would also require
Definitely.
best management practices. All right, any other questions? Keep in mind that we have permitted this in the past. Are there any others or members of the public that would like to ask a question or be heard or make comment? Hearing none, is there a motion to issue a negative determination with the special conditions that erosion controls will be in place, that the trench will be closed nightly, and we have what we sometimes refer to as a boilerplate, and that is construction equipment will
Right,
not be
storage.
stored overnight.
And refueling.
And refueling. So they'll neither be stored nor will they be refueled within the 100-foot buffer zone,
Certainly.
okay? 'Cause that's as part of it.
Okay.
And then you will use, or the contractor will use best management practices.
Absolutely.
Is that a motion?
So,
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Good to go, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Appreciate it, Kate. Next on the agenda is number 4. Next is proposed grant of conservation restriction at 245 Highland Street. Good evening, sir. Good evening. You know what you can have? Oh, that'd be great. Kathy? Can I slide up to you? That's actually good. All right, good evening, and could you identify yourself for the recorder, please?
Certainly. My name is Ned Corcoran. I'm an attorney representing Martha and Dennis Burke, and I'm joined at the table by Martha Burke. Martha and Dennis are the owners of the property at 245 Highland Street here in Milton. And I submitted a memorandum and some color plans, but I have more if you need them. We were here a year or so ago at the start of a process involving the redevelopment of this property with the planning board. Original plan was a 6-lot standard subdivision under the town's standard Residence A zoning. And after submitting a preliminary plan to the planning board asked us to consider a clustered, an alternative under the cluster provision of the bylaw, which allows for smaller lots clustered to preserve open space. And the minimum amount of open space to be preserved would be 35% of the property. We went through a fairly extensive process with the planning board. We started with 8 lots, reduced to 7, and after reducing to 7, the planning board agreed that that was appropriate, and so they, in February, voted to grant a special permit. The special permit was signed in March, and it will be final within the next week or so once the appeal period runs. When we were here, we talked about the notion of placing a conservation restriction on the 35% of the property that is subject to the open space, and we'd had a preliminary conversation with the commission about the notion of the commission being the recipient, the holder of the CR. So the plan that we have shows the property that is subject to the CR. It's a little less than 3 acres, and it essentially extends around the outside of the property. There are a couple of drainage structures that are placed in the approximate on either side of the site drive. But the purpose of this was to minimize the impact of building a new roadway and whatnot. So on the right-hand side, as you pull in off of Highland Street, there is a underground detention system using Cultex. They're located in a small opening. There's some beautiful, particularly on the right-hand side, large trees, significant amount of trees. It's located in an area where there's some minor clearing of some new invasive growth, with no impact on the larger trees. And on the left, there's a rain garden type of structure with an outlet that would feed across and ultimately into the town's drain system. But that is within the meadow area that's to the left of the road. There are no trees that would be impacted by that. And
Can I ask you,
Sure.
just interrupt you for a second, the plan that you're referencing, what's the date on that plan?
the plan I'm referencing is revised February 14, 2017.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're all using the same one.
And that is the layout plan that was approved by the planning board as part of the special permit. And now the question really is, who would be the holder of this conservation area? Normally it would default to the condominium association or the homeowner association that will be put in place to own and manage the roadway, to make sure that the stormwater systems are taken care of properly. And the question is whether the Burkes or their successors as the homeowner association would be the holder of that property, or whether the commission itself would agree to serve as the recipient of the CR, so there would be sort of a third party making sure that there's no mischief going on within the CR area, either by the homeowners association or by individual homeowners. And so that's the request. If the commission would deem appropriate, I think I submitted a draft form of a CR. Would need to share that more specifically with town council And I think under the law, it would have to be signed by the Board of Selectmen, it would be signed by the Commission, it would be signed by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. So it has, that review has to go through some level of additional oversight. But first question, obviously, is the Commission willing or able to serve as the recipient of the CR purposes?
All right, we're very grateful for the offer, but let's have a practical discussion about whether or not we have the capacity to monitor both of these. I know it's an issue, Arthur. I think you've actually got involved in the very same issue with respect to the Walcott estate, the Carver estate. And this is obviously much smaller and, you know, ostensibly easier to monitor, but to the extent that we only have 20% of Kathy as an agent, we really don't have a person, at least 100% of a person as our agent. And it would sort of devolve to the commission members to periodically keep an eye. I know you live across the street, but I just, is it practical for us to do that? I think it's generally a great idea.
I do too, and two thoughts on this, John. Unless we do things of this nature, the town is never going to get us the conservation agent that we needed. So, because we don't have a conservation agent, doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing this. We should be doing this and then bringing it to the town, saying we need a conservation agent in order to
And
manage
most
this.
towns in the Commonwealth have a full,
Absolutely.
not
Exactly.
a fifth of an agent.
And the second thing is, the CR would give the Conservation Commission a legal tie for enforcement.
Correct.
I think that would be much more, that combination would be far more advantageous in the interests of the town.
All right, a little bit of this discussion though is, you know, are we putting the cart before the horse or the horse?
Sometimes you have to.
Sometimes you do. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that the issue is on the table.
Sure, it's fairly understood. Yeah, I agree.
Now, is this the first cluster development? I know it's, the regulation has been in effect for a long time, but is this the first one?
It's the first one that's made it through to a special permit.
Okay.
The,
What about the hillsides? Is that a cluster?
that's being proposed as a cluster. That hasn't come all the way through the planning board's process. And the same is true of the town farm property, the Governor Stoughton land. That is, Pulte Homes is coming through the planning board as a cluster there. I think they've closed the public hearing. They're in the final wordsmithing, I think, of the special permit itself. Maybe approved and signed Thursday night, I'm not positive, but those are the first three. So the cluster bylaw was enacted sometime in the 1970s.
I guess what I'm thinking then is, like Arthur's saying, that if this is the first one, there'll be others coming along that we may be asked as well to hold the easement. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think somebody needs to do it consistently, some board. It makes sense for us to do it.
Or did we hold other easements?
Yes,
I think
not
John
in this-
Cronin has been very good at developing an inventory.
Right.
And one of the issues that we have had in our recent history is 88 Milton Street. 'Cause
Yes.
that's still held up at the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. The Secretary has not yet signed off on that.
Why?
You got the selectmen, you got us, but that's still, there was a wordsmithing, and that's what, a year?
Oh, at least, yeah.
2 years?
I'd say 3.
So, just to be clear, so the commission will hold the CR, but the responsibility of maintenance would still lie under the homeowners association?
Correct, but it's the monitoring to make sure that it's appropriately maintained.
So that I don't encroach
Yep.
this area.
No,
If I own that.
it's the maintenance
Which I
and
love.
oversight.
Beautiful, beautiful subdivision.
You know, and it's not a large cost to the homeowners, but there'll be an annual amount that'll be paid in as part of the association dues that would cover the process of internally monitoring and then responding to any issues or complaints that might arise.
Is there a sense that, I agree with you, I just want to make sure that we're aware that this does have a practical impact on us. And at least right now, we're not set up to do a lot of this, and we've got other property that we're supposed to be the stewards of, and some of it we're not even aware of where it is. In fact, right across from the intersection of where the latest conveyance to conservation restriction that came to us at 88 Milton Street, right across Brush Hill Road, we have land that's deeded to the Conservation Commission. We didn't know it even existed. And then we found it was being cultivated.
Yes.
Right? We didn't even know. So those are the things. I agree with you, Arthur, that I think as we build up the responsibility of the Conservation Commission, we do need more help from the town. And Kathy, you do wonderful work. We just wish we had more of your time.
All over. But also the nice tie-in with the homeowners association too, the way this is
Yeah.
being put forward. So it's not mutually exclusive. There's an interface.
That's right. And the homeowners association trust documents also provide for the obligation to perform adequate maintenance, to fund the maintenance and whatnot. So there's a double-edged. There's two prongs to the oversight of.
Yes, that's understood.
Very nice.
Any other questions, Commissioners?
No, was there someone in back that had a question?
Oh, there would be, right. Any abutters and members of the public? Yes.
Hi, I'm Nancy Reed. I just have a question about, I thought that,
Sorry, Nancy, for the record, is Nancy the last name?
Reed.
Reed, thank you very much.
I thought that the Brush Hill Road, the Popias property was a cluster development. You're saying this is the first, but I thought that was the first.
No, the cluster, the St. Pius property on Brush Hill Road is being developed as a clustered townhouse development, but it is being done under a separate bylaw provision. That was a bylaw that was generally written for that project. It applies to some other properties, but the density in that case is much greater than what will be allowed under the town's cluster bylaw provision.
So the cluster bylaw provision that goes back to the 70s is for single-family standalone houses, and St. Pius is a townhouse?
Yes, it's a townhouse planned unit development. It's 36 units on 8 acres. This is 7 house lots on 8 acres.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Marion, I know you had a question. You were very gracious.
Thanks. I'm the attorney for the Hillside Street Cluster Development, which has not yet gone before the planning board, but it will be in a week. And so I'm interested in this because, but I have a couple questions, and I'm not really quite clear on how all this works. So I'm hoping that what you talk about tonight is going to help me do what I'm supposed to do for this application. My understanding is, yeah, this is the cluster zoning that we rewrote in 2014, and it's for single-family development. It's written as a PUD, which is similar to the Brush Hill Road zoning, but it's different zoning. And yours will be the first, the one that's been approved. So what the zoning, I didn't realize this until recently, and I'm still not absolutely sure it's correct, but what I've been told by the planning board staff is that if the homeowners association owns the open land, and it's called open land in this cluster zoning, that you are required to grant a conservation easement to the town of Milton, not that you have a choice. And this is what they've been telling me, so I'd be happy to hear that it's not true. However, it's still a viable, proposal or option in either case. But what I want to bring to your attention is that the zoning may say that in order, if you want to have the homeowners association own the open land, if you don't want to grant it entirely to the town of Milton and let them manage it, And that's what we would do on the Hillside Street, too, is that the homeowners association would own it, exactly as you're proposing. And they would maintain it, and they maintain the drainage structures, and they are required by the terms of the permit to maintain it as open land permanently, forever. And, you know, the Mass General laws that limit restrictions on land don't limit restrictions that are imposed as a result of a planning board special permit or subdivision approval. So I don't understand why the zoning, why I'm being told that you have to grant the conservation easement, because it seems like, I think it's fine to do it, and we may be required to do it, and you may have to, you ask a good question. You may have to do this each time there's a cluster development that has a homeowners association that wants to continue to own the open land.
See, I thought the question was a little different. That is, you have to grant the conservation easement, but you don't have to grant it to the Conservation Commission. It could be to
Where
the
else would you
trustees
grant
of the
it?
reservation, or it could be to the Wildlands Trust.
But nobody would be interested in it. That's why I don't understand the requirement.
I thought
In the
Wildlands
case of the,
Trust
yeah.
was interested in the Walcott.
No, it says, well,
Then that would be fine if they were, but in that case, you wouldn't, I think you'd do it differently.
I'm looking at the cluster bylaw, which is subsection J of section.
This is the old 1970s, or you're talking
No,
about
no.
the 2014?
Talking about the 2014. There was some minor amendment, there were amendments made to the cluster bylaw in 2010 to actually make it work for property owners, because
Yeah.
the prior cluster, language of the cluster just didn't provide any incentive for a landowner to do anything other than a simple subdivision. But this created some adjustments to the density calculation that provided the opportunity to develop some additional lots in exchange for providing some affordable housing and increasing the amount of open space that would be available. So that was the premise of the change to, those are some of the premises of the change to the bylaw. The section that deals with open land says that open land in a cluster development may be owned by the town of Milton for park and open space use with the town's consent, by a nonprofit organization, the principal purpose for which is conservation of open space, or by a corporation or trust as described in paragraph 13. Paragraph 13 refers to a corporation or trust that seems to refer to the homeowners association as the homeowners trust. So I'm not sure.
Then I think if you look in the next paragraph, you see that this is something that has only come to me recently, and I did not read the bylaw to say that you had to do this, but
I didn't either. I tell you, at the time when we were coming forward with this, we didn't. We considered the commission as an appropriate recipient because the Burkes didn't want to remain solely responsible for managing the open land. So we did come before the commission and asked the commission to consider receiving the CR. And we did it because we thought that was a more appropriate approach. I didn't read that in the bylaw. I'm not sure I do as I skim through the bylaw now, but it's obviously worth a closer look the next time I come forward.
I appreciate the discussion. I will be following up and, you know, providing more information to the Conservation Commission if necessary, if there's some difference of opinion as to whether it's required by the bylaw. In any case, it's a good discussion. You need to decide whether you can accept that regardless. I mean, you know, whether you want that.
My recollection of the earlier conversation was that it was an offer to the Conservation Commission.
When...
It is,
Right,
yeah.
right.
We were,
It is.
it's the first time I had to think about whether or not it was a requirement, because I hadn't reached that conclusion in my own review of the bylaws. I was preparing the application for the special permit. I didn't consider.
You have the bylaw there. Can I just?
I'm glad it's taking this course, because we did have a problem with the lower states, because there was a detention pond there that was part of the original permit, but nobody wanted to take care of it, because as each individual lot was sold off, everybody was pointing to somebody else to take care of that detention pond. And we were stuck with a drainage system that wasn't working, because it wasn't properly cared for. So it took quite an effort on our part to go back and say, look, you know, the homeowners must take care of it. So I'm glad this is coming forward in this fashion.
It's written into the bylaw that the homeowners association has to assume responsibility legal responsibility and so on and so forth. And so you have to write a declaration of trust as part of your application. It has to be reviewed, and it has to demonstrate that that responsibility has been assigned to the homeowners association, which owns the open land, if that's the way you're doing it, forever. And it owns it, but it owns it with the restriction that it has to be maintained as open land, and the bylaw defines what open land is, and it's a conservation easement essentially, except that you can have drainage structures, but you can do that in some conservation easements. You can have septic systems in there. So this is not a comment to say that I don't agree that the Conservation Commission, or that it would be a good thing if the Conservation Commission could accept this. It's a confusion that I have, and I didn't know whether you had any more information, but apparently you don't, so. Nobody knows at this point. It's a new bylaw. So I'm just going to sit down and look at this for a second and continue your discussion. Sorry to interrupt.
Marion may have a follow-up question, but I don't want to bring this to a head too quickly, but my view is that this is a proposed grant of conservation restriction, and it does require input from John Flynn and the town council in terms of the language of the conservation restriction. And the problem that we had with the 88 Milton Street conservation restriction is that we went through that process and we got the town council to approve the language. The selectmen signed it, we signed it, and then the environmental affairs representative said, no, that language is not appropriate for us. So I think in approaching this, we have to get everybody to sign off on the language.
Which is why I submitted to you in draft only. I wouldn't come back to you until I'm confident that all parties have reviewed and approved and it's in final form that everybody's willing to sign.
Well, I think what we should do, therefore, is put forth a resolution, a motion to pass a resolution that we support the proposition of assigning to us the conservation restriction, the language to be worked out by town council and then council for the Department of Environmental Affairs. Do you have a comment or question?
I don't, I'm not sure what this means for the Conservation Commission. The restriction, the condition is, in any case where the open land is not conveyed to the town of Milton, you're not conveying it to the town of Milton, you're holding it, the homeowners association is owning it, is that correct?
That's the current.
Right, which is the same for Hillside Street in our proposed development. A perpetual conservation restriction pursuant to General Law, Chapter 184, Section 31 to 33, shall be granted to the town and recorded with the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. So it's going to be granted to the town, so the question then always becomes, well, I always assumed if you grant it to the town, that the conservation restriction, the Conservation Commission has some role to play. Or, I mean, there isn't anyone else. I mean, what's the meaning? What's the point of having this in here if nobody does anything? I think it's unnecessary, but I didn't, write the bylaw, so.
But if you don't grant it to the Conservation Commission, and you grant it to the town, and if we don't have jurisdiction, that would be a problem.
I know, so I think it's
you need to convey it directly to the Conservation Commission. It's just like, remember when we were dealing with the cell tower, on the access road to the landfill, there's a section to the right of the road as you're entering from Randolph Ave that apparently belongs to the Conservation Commission.
Yeah.
But it's not jurisdiction. Somebody granted it to us, we didn't know we had it. And that creates confusion, that now that we know that we have it as sort of a deeded grantee, it makes it easier for us to administer. And I think the same thing is true here. I think we need to have the CR to us.
Mm-hmm. So that,
otherwise, we wouldn't have jurisdiction.
And so the other thing I'd ask the commission to think about is, though, whether it actually makes, what would you do in your role? I don't understand. It seems to me the homeowners association is responsible for the perpetual maintenance of open land is open land. So what does the conservation, yes.
To monitor, to make sure that it's done.
To enforce it.
So the purpose of, but But that would be the planning board, because this is a special permit, and the planning board enforces the terms of the permit. It may be that when this was written, that the concept was that you needed, the planning board wanted to assign that part of the monitoring, I guess, to the Conservation Commission. They just weren't clear in the way they wrote it. And so if you see that as a viable role, then that makes sense to me.
It's a viable role for us,
Mhm.
because it falls within our charter and in our mandate, but we just don't have a full-time agent.
Right, it
and
was,
we need
yeah,
it.
not much to, well, it's.
But that's our
Worth
problem.
further discussion, I guess, but, you know, my plan was to pretty much do the same thing Mr. Corcoran did, write the easement the same way. In fact, I already reviewed what he had written. I assumed that that's what would be necessary, but I'm interested to hear your discussion, and, you know, it'll all get worked out, I think. I hope.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very much.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from members of the public, or comments, or suggestions? Okay. My view at this stage is that we need to determine whether or not we want to have it. But this, remember, it's just a proposed grant, so it's not a notice of intent, or an ANRAD, or an RDA. It's something that I think we'd have to pass by way of resolution, that we would be, we would accept this grant, assuming that the language of the grant itself is appropriately approved by town council from the town side, and then Commonwealth's council from the environmental affairs. Is there a census or a consensus?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I agree with.
Or is there any other thought? Do we have a consensus on that issue?
Well, I'm going to abstain from this vote because I'm a good friend of the Burkes, and
Well,
I
you would be
spoke
our
in
monitor.
favor.
Kathy,
Well,
it's gonna be
I
you.
can do that, but I'm not going to vote at this point.
All right, fair enough.
A question, if you take it, Judith knows there's a lot of dead trees and branches down. How clean do you want to take it?
Oh,
Do you
she,
want it all cleaned up,
yeah,
or-
absolutely. Every last, blade of grass. You know what she's like.
You know those woodpeckers love those dead trees.
That's true. I mean, there's a lot of invasive, just for instance, euonymus trees that have just planted themselves, and things that you don't want anymore. Do I have to get rid of all those before you take it, or?
I think the first step would probably be to ask for some sort of maintenance plan for the land.
Right, I think that's a good point. Both of them are good points.
Yeah.
Now, the maintenance plan would be going to the planning board anyway, correct?
There was a simple maintenance plan that was attached to, reviewed and approved by the planning board, which I can get copies to you.
And does that include the stormwater structures?
Yes.
Okay. Or was it just
Well, it's
geared towards the stormwater structures?
No, the maintenance, there were two things. One, there's it's attached to the homeowners trust document, there is an open land management plan.
Okay.
Really defines what the objective is, how they'll be managed, invasives can be removed, things like that. There's a separate stormwater management and operations plan that's in effect that deals with the maintenance and cleaning out of the stormwater structures.
Mhm.
Those are both attached as exhibits to the special permit.
All right, so when this comes back this would be simply a resolution, because there's no
Yes.
real application before us.
Mhm.
When it comes back, it probably could be, it's not jurisdictional for us, there's no wetland resource.
There is no wetland on the
Right.
But I think that Martha raises a good point, and it's a difficult one, just in general, that any other property that we may choose to accept. And that is, what condition do we ask the property to be in when we accept it? I mean, if the property is a mess of invasives, it's going to require months of somebody's work to try to bring it back to where it's fit habitat. So those aspects of, there's an idealized sense of conserved land and what it should look like, and then there's the reality of what property can look like. So I think it is an important issue. To what extent do we say before we accept it, there has to be some level of invasives removed, question of any safety issues before we accept it, trees that are actually a danger, those sort of issues. And I think it's
what I was
not
saying.
for this
But we're
property,
only
but in
accept-
general.
Only
in general.
accepting the conservation restriction.
Right.
We're not accepting the land.
I know.
So in terms of public
But
safety, that's a
what
good
would-
point.
But
that's
what would
back on
our
the-
standard be to say it's not meeting the standard of what this property should look like? You know what I mean? So that the homeowners have to maintain it. To what level do they have to maintain it? Do they have to remove all of the bittersweet or not?
It would seem that in order
you
to
know.
go down that lane, we would need an overarching umbrella policy on all conservation property.
Yeah.
I agree.
You can't just cherry pick.
Right, because
Yeah.
thus far, we've only done things like, remember we were at Winter Valley? And we looked off the edge of the driveway that they're
Yes.
trying to reconstruct. We saw all of the
Debris.
the debris, the
Yeah.
tires and old,
Yeah, just
Everything.
trash and
Trash.
such, yeah,
that was something that we'd say, okay, that's our land, clean it up.
right.
And they did. That's different than this question. And I agree with Arthur 100% that we need to have a uniform policy that we'd apply everywhere. Because what I had envisioned initially was that, if you started dumping old tires and refrigerators and stuff, then you'd say, oh, you can't do that. But I actually hadn't considered sort of affirmative action, removing the bittersweet. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
So I think before we respond to this particular conservation restriction, we need to come up with a policy and perhaps implement a regulation.
For all property
For all
as it comes
properties.
along, yeah.
Right.
And I think we should give it some thought and what sort of language and what elements we'd be dealing with, whether it would be invasive vines, whether it would be, garlic mustard that's spreading all over the place, that sort of stuff.
That's different. I mean, thus far, basically what we've done is if we spot people dumping their detritus into, like, right across at the corner of Canton Avenue and Highland Street, across from where Thatcher Street comes up, people used to walk across Canton Avenue. We've seen them, they dump their grass clippings in there,
Yeah.
and that's a wetland. So that's the kind of time when we'd step and say, oh, don't do that. That's not the same thing as removing invasive species. So I think we need to,
I'll get you a copy of the open land management plan. It's 2 full pages, it's got thou shalt and thou shalt nots. Mostly thou shalt nots, but there's, annual review of the area to investigate for invasives and.
This is the planning commissions,
This is
the planning board.
The planning board's determination. For example, the stormwater detention basin shall be treated as a rain garden with appropriate plantings consistent with the functions of the basin. So, but this might be helpful.
Yes, it would be
as a
very
tool
helpful.
for you, thinking about more broadly.
I think so. I don't think we have to hold up
No, I
this
agree.
particular.
I think we're a year away from being ready to convey it to you.
Okay.
Given the amount of time I think it might take to get through EOEA and other
Right.
town review. But, the special permit becomes final shortly. They're gonna begin work on the roadway. They're about to convey 1 lot to their daughter who's gonna start construction on a home. There's 5 other lots that are gonna be developed. That will take some time, and all that conveyancing process will take time. So I would say that we're 6 months to a year from being in a position where we're ready to have you sign a document, and I can get you copies of things so that you can review them and determine if they're helpful and how you might otherwise apply those things.
All right, so with that background, it seems like we've got a consensus. Do we need a resolution to say that we are sort of generally receptive to accepting the conservation restriction, the terms and conditions of which will be worked out at a later date? That makes sense to you?
That makes sense to me.
Does that make sense to you? Everybody on board?
Because one of the things we need to do also is we're gonna prepare a conveyancing plan that will be recorded, and it will show this as open land.
All right, so is that a motion from somebody other than Judith. So that you're moving for, that we pass a resolution to accept the conveyance of the conservation restriction, the terms and conditions of which will be determined at a later time. Seconded? Anybody second?
Second.
Second, okay. Any discussion? All in favor with one abstention, all in favor? Okay, any abstentions? Okay. So there's no opposition either. So you're done. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, that is, now we go to request for certificate of compliance, 333 Hillside Street.
Should I stay here?
Yes, sir, thank you very much.
All right. Someone stole my easel, so I'll use your chairs. Hello, my name is Claudio Sala with DeSelberg Associates, the design engineers for the project. Actually, the design engineer in this project is Jim Burke. He has a couple of conflicts tonight. He has to be in North Attleboro and Canton at the same time. I don't know who took Canton, but I was elected to this, for this. So basically, we are requesting a certificate of compliance for the work at 333 Hillside Street. Jim sent a letter along with the application, which lists several deficiencies. And I'm not sure, I was planning on just going through them one at a time, or if you got, he sort of suggested that you might want to schedule a site visit anyway and discuss them on site, or we can do them now. Or.
I'd like you to go through them, but I'll tell you right from the start. I read this and I went, oh my word. The deviation includes an encroachment of approximately 2 feet of the driveway, extends into an isolated wetland.
Yes,
Ouch.
that's the biggest one. And he didn't feel that was a big issue, but.
We do.
Well, you know Jim, I don't know if you know Jim Burke.
Oh, yes. He used to be our conservation agent.
Okay, right. Well, before my time, I'm the new guy, so. Okay, so we'll take them one at a time. The encroachment of approximately 2 feet of driveway into the isolated wetland area. And that is right here. And I hope you have plans. If you don't, I don't know if we could pass these around. Not quite sure how it happened. And I saw the points personally, we laid out the driveway.
So is it right in this section? Right in that corner, right where your pen is? Okay, I got you.
The largest extent is 2 feet. So we laid out the
What's the total square footage?
I don't know.
Okay.
So it's 2 feet by probably 20, so maybe 40, 50 square feet. We did lay out the driveway for construction, and probably between the time we did the layout and it was actually constructed, maybe the wetlands flags were removed. Maybe the stakes were removed, they didn't call us back. It happened, we didn't even notice until we did the as-built survey, and we only know by the location of the driveway and having the prior location of the wetlands flags by survey. Jim did make a site visit. He said if you look at it, you can't even tell there's an encroachment. So that's why he didn't think it was an issue.
What went down underneath the paved section? I mean, did they build up the wetlands? Did they put something on top of it? Did they put in new fill to support the driveway?
Typically for the driveway, and I don't think we have a detail, we might. Typically, you would excavate 6 to 12 inches of topsoil and bring that back to within 4 inches of final grade with structural fill or sand and gravel, and then pave your driveway. I don't see a cross-section of this driveway. 12 inches of gravel below it, yeah. So they excavated 12 inches of gravel, brought it back up. 12 inches of soil, brought it back up to grade with gravel, and then paved and binder course.
And who is they exactly? Who did this construction?
Who did this inspection?
No,
Oh,
construction.
construction.
of the
Well,
driveway.
we did it for Charles Bosworth, so I assume they did the construction.
Ouch, double ouch. So the applicant did the construction.
The owner is not Bosworth,
Well, he's the applicant.
but he was the applicant.
I thought he was gonna live there, but did he sell it?
I don't know. Before, like I said, before my time, I haven't seen the project. So that was the bigger one.
Right.
The next one would be a proposed driveway. It was proposed at 14 feet wide, but actually only constructed at 12 feet wide. I assume that's beneficial.
I would
The-
assume so, but it draws into question why they had to encroach into the wetlands by 2 feet if they're actually shrinking the width of the driveway.
Right. And that's, the only thing I can think of is, like I said, the time frame between layout and actual construction and what happened in that
Okay.
time, and they never call us.
But who was supervising this? I mean, who was on
We
site?
can't supervise the job.
But who was supervising it?
Like I said, Charles Bosworth is the contractor. We show, when they call us for an inspection, we can go. When they call us for layout, construction layout, we go. If we find anything obvious, we explain it. In the real world, it doesn't always happen.
So where was the approved alignment of the driveway versus, is it just the shift
Just in that, it
overall,
seems
or-
like just in that area. The rest of it is pretty consistent. That's why I don't see why it could have happened.
We're not exactly mathematicians, but pretty consistent. Doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence.
Well, I have the proposed design. And it's quite a long driveway, but it's probably about 6 or 7 feet off this property line in parallel. So we get to this wetland area, and if you go around it, and it goes up to the house.
So it looks like they kind of flattened the curve there, then they went straight instead of, is that correct?
This is on a larger scale, but yes, it looks like that curve is not as pronounced, obviously. So the driveway is got pushed over instead of going out.
Can you tell, it looks like, I'm trying to figure out if that's, is that the driveway line? As planned.
As planned, it's not. This is the
No,
as-built.
this is the as-built.
This is an as-built driveway line.
Well, I'm trying, okay, so that's the one that basically clips the wetland right there. So what I'm trying to figure out is, under was plan. Where is that, how close does the driveway line, it looks like,
Very close to the flags, yeah. There might be a blow up on the next sheet, if you want to put that.
is there an extra sheet in this?
Right there, in that
This
corner.
one, it misses it.
Doesn't quite make it.
Better than this.
No, it's the same.
So I'm just, it looks to be off the wetland area by a little bit, not very much.
Just a little, maybe a
I'm
foot,
surprised.
if that.
That's convenient.
So, but that means if it's
You know,
off by a foot and it's now encroaching by 2 feet, they moved it 3
That's
feet.
the
Yes.
question.
All right, did you get that, Arthur? And,
That's what we
that
just-
if it's off by 1 foot and it's now encroaching by 2 feet, that means it moved 3 feet
Mhm.
to get into the wetlands where it currently is. Okay,
Thanks, Tim.
all right, thanks. But that, again, it brings to the forefront the question of, if it's going from 14 to 12, it seems like they actually could have,
Why shift, right?
why shift?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks. Can you keep going with bullet points here?
So, actually, one last question. The reduction in width, is that throughout the entire length, or is that just in certain areas?
Nope, the entire length. Okay, so next item, or bullet number 3. There was a proposed grass swale between the driveway and the northern property line. That is actually constructed with crushed stone, not grass.
What's underneath the crushed stone?
Don't know. I assume they put the crushed stone over.
It's not driveway under there, is it?
It's not driveway
Is that the
under
other
there,
2
no.
feet
There
of
is a crushed,
driveway?
it's a crushed stone swale. It's not the driveway. It's just not loamed and seeded. It's just crushed stone. Eventually, I'm sure it will.
Why is it crushed stone and not grass?
Good question.
Do you have any idea what size stone?
No. It's probably the 3/4 to 1.5 inches, but I'm not positive. The next one would be the cure logs, the choir logs, along that swale. I think we had them placed, proposed at every 25 feet or so. Those were not installed. We did not, according to Jim, did not observe any siltation or sand going down that.
Were any BMPs installed?
For the construction?
Yes.
This is for the long-term after construction. They were to just block any sedimentation and sand coming off the road and driveway from
So I
getting to
forget,
the
was
well.
that a permanent condition?
That was a permanent condition.
Okay, so they're not there.
They're not there. But, like I said, we didn't observe any siltation or anything going down there. And now, most people don't really use sand anymore, so. Again, Jim didn't feel that was very adverse.
But if people don't use sand anymore, it probably means that they're using a whole lot more chemicals. And-
Yes.
And
More salt, right?
from your knowledge, do you know if the core logs do anything in terms of absorbing chemicals?
No, I don't think so. They just slowed the flow down to allow the sand
There's
and
no
particles to
absorptive
settle.
capacity?
But no, any chemicals will be dissolved in the water, they just keep going. The next one would be the hydrants. The hydrants were both proposed on the wetland side of the driveway. They have actually been installed on the non-wetland side of the driveway, away from the wetlands. Well, there are wetlands on both sides, though. Yes, I know. Well, in each case, different wetland areas.
In the wetland, that's what he says.
So we had a hydrant proposed here, near this wetland. And we had a hydrant proposed here, near this wetland. Those have been installed here on this side, and down here, they're on this side. It's installed here. There is a paved swale around the catch basin here. He didn't do a very good job of describing where these are.
Can you hold those up again so we can, or try to?
Yes, as soon as I figure it out. Probably two-thirds of the way down the driveway where the two the structures are proposed across from this driveway. There's the,
That's the driveway from, whose land is that? We were up there a lot.
Dean?
Yeah, Martin Dean, yes.
Sorry, can you show where that was?
This is the driveway for Martin Dean's house.
Yeah.
And then we actually spent a considerable amount of time during the construction of this house, so we were familiar with the area. But now, where are the...
There's the catch basin, which is, the two control structures, was proposed next to the driveway. And what they actually did was, they paved a swale around the catch basin to try to make it easier for the water, the runoff to go into the catch basin and not bypass it.
What was originally proposed?
Just a straight driveway going right by. So basically, it would just run off the driveway into the catch basin, but take sediment with it.
This is a definite site visit for us to see it.
So they felt that by paving it,
So they extended the paving area. Okay.
yes, around the catch basin, basically.
Okay.
The next one, he says, an additional outlet was added from the catch basin structure. This manhole structure, or the manhole structure at the location was not constructed due to the cover over the culvert. Again, poor wording. That is in,
I can see why Jim sent you here.
oh, they broke this to me at noon time today. Hey, let's go to lunch.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, we have this little pocket isolated wetland that was crossed by the driveway. So that would have been right here. That would have been sort of landlocked, or the hydraulic connection would be lost. So they had proposed a culvert, well, going into this manhole, and this outlet drain.
Just the elevations on 60.
This way. Instead of installing this manhole, which, because of the grade, they didn't have enough height to actually build the structure, build the manhole, so that it would flow, the flow would work. What they did was, and I'm not sure if they had approval by the design engineer for this, but they constructed a culvert across the driveway, and from that manhole here, instead of going to a manhole here and then out, they just went straight to a second, outlet structure. So we have
But that, isn't that
outlets.
dumping
Yeah,
water
it's-
on the Mountain Dean's product?
No, the outlet was, for the drainage, was always here. So all the drainage was coming from the control structures down the driveway, outletting here. In its path, it was picking up this little isolated pocket that we're crossing. But because they couldn't build a manhole here due to height, no height available, they
So
just
the
put
only
a-
real change is the elimination of the
of the drainage structure. Right. So they just put a conventional culvert, 15-inch culvert across the driveway from wetland to outlet. And this one, instead of going to here, it just went straight to the outlet. So we have two outlet pipes here instead of just the one. But effectively, it does the same thing. Okay.
So when they couldn't do the one, they came back to you and said, we can't do it this way, the way you designed it, so give us the okay to do it differently?
They came back to you part? I can't say.
No, I
No,
mean,
they
to
didn't
you.
come back to us.
They didn't
No,
come
no, no.
back-
When you're saying they came to us,
Yeah.
I can't say that. I don't know. If they came to us and say, is this okay?
So you can't tell us whether or not this was a field change by the contractor, or if it was a redesign by Jim?
No,
or Jim
no,
himself?
I can't. I didn't think to ask him. He didn't mention it.
Okay.
And the last one, there was a catch basin added off the driveway to minimize erosion and channelization from the driveway. And that catch basin is here. It's slightly within your buffer zone. It was not proposed. And it does go into the last control structure. Apparently what was happening was the runoff from this driveway was going and channelizing and causing erosion. So in an attempt to stop that, they installed this additional catch basin, which goes into the control structure before going out to the detention pond.
So why did they put?
And that was a redesign, or that was a field change?
Not sure.
Does that affect the sizing at all, the detention basin, or the functionality of it?
According to Jim, it does not.
Do we have evidence of that?
I don't have evidence of that.
Okay.
Can you just kind of ballpark for me? And I won't hold you to this, okay? But you've got the elevations here, and this is 140, that's 139. So the catch basin is at 139. And it's in our, I mean, it's jurisdictional. They're putting a catch basin in our buffer zone. without permitting. Could you just ballpark, why wouldn't they put it out here at 138 or 137? They could have gotten out of our jurisdiction. I can't figure out why they put it there instead of there.
Probably because, like you say, it might have been a field change, and they didn't really know where they were, because the buffer zone line probably is not staked. And if it was staked, it was probably so long ago that they were gone. And again, I'm not familiar with the contractor in this case either. I know Dave Bosworth, well, I knew Dave Bosworth. Is he still alive? But I don't know him. And I unfortunately, I can't answer most of your questions, and actually Jim said they'll probably just schedule a site visit anyway.
I think the funniest sentence is the second one at the bottom, where you say DBA would like to request a certificate of compliance. Where's the compliance?
Wow.
I already picked on him about his language up above, so.
You can see my original notes. Look at that big denied across my report here. All right,
Well,
so
it's only money.
What's good for a site walk? Everybody?
The 22nd of April,
The 22nd of April, which is,
a week from this Saturday.
everybody like the 22nd?
Wait, 22nd of April, okay. Jim said he cannot make it unless it's 8 or 9 a.m.
Can we request that Jim be there?
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing.
Oh, and the 22nd of April is Earth Day. so-
Seems appropriate.
The 22nd is good for me. Do we
Yeah,
have
me too.
anything else, Kathy?
I think we'll probably, after this.
Yeah.
I think this.
Okay.
Can we make this the first event, because I've got
Sure.
conflict? I'd have to be gone by 11 at the latest.
Great, okay.
But I don't want to miss this one.
I might go too.
So who currently owns the property?
Sell tickets.
Bharat Agrawal.
Okay.
Did you know it was owned by Charlie Bosworth?
Now, this is very appropriate for the 22nd, because the 22nd of April is Earth Day.
Yes, I know. That's what Judith said.
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry.
Site walk. So we'll at least tentatively put it on for 8 a.m. Saturday, the 22nd. Okay.
No
This is
Attleboro,
gonna
no
go in,
Randolph, no excuses.
This is gonna go into the record books for compliance certificate. All right, are there any abutters or members of the public? Okay. Thank you for being the sacrificial lamb. We appreciate it.
No problem.
And we look forward to seeing somebody, presumably Jim, there on the
Saturday.
22nd.
Yes.
And so the house has already been sold? Is anybody living in it? You said the owner is.
So,
What a certificate
been
of.
built. I think it was sold to the homeowner of this house.
All right. You may want to give the homeowner a heads up, because he probably has no idea what's coming.
Mhm.
Okay?
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
That's a short story.
Yes. All right, that's our next request for certificate of compliance, 41 Highland Lane.
Hi, Tom Corcoran. I'm here on behalf of Joe Corcoran, the owner of 41 Highland Lane, with a request for certificate of compliance. The guess the order was probably issued a little over a year ago, and the home was done, completed last fall. Landscaping was completed last fall. And I believe we're in compliance with the order. I can answer any questions if you have any.
You didn't build a driveway in the wetland, did you? Vernal pool, did you, Tom?
I think we avoided that.
That's good.
I had a note when I read it some time ago. And I was looking for, well, you could probably help me out with flags. Did our original plan have the flags there? Do you know, Kathy, on our permitted plan, do we have the flags here? This doesn't have the flags in place. And there's a drainage easement here too, isn't it?
There is.
That I didn't, do we have it here?
This is one, Hans, you weren't here, but there's a pond in the back behind the property, off the property. And there was a question of whether it's a vernal pool or not. And instead of deciding one way or the other, Tom, the developer, agreed to treat it as though it were. So that's why he moved the property forward, and the whole lot is treated as though it does have that significance.
This is approved.
There is,
So that
right.
is okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna show.
Tom, is there a pipe that comes in from Highland
is.
Lane? I can't quite
I
remember.
think
Where is
that-
it exactly?
That's what I was
Yeah.
remembering.
There is a,
It's over here, isn't it?
It's a catch basin, I believe it's right here. The drainage from the street
mm-hmm,
goes out 12-inch, I think, RCP pipe that discharges out into that, probably is what created that
yes, yeah, at
the
least in
little-
part.
ponded area. So that was there pre-existing and hadn't changed at all.
Uh-huh.
So the wetland flag, if I recall, one flag was moved during the site walk.
Right,
which was-
yes.
Which was adjusted,
Mm-hmm.
and the hay bales were installed accordingly.
I think it looks good, but let's take a look at it on our site walk. Because remember, all of this now is being left, in natural state along this section.
That area was supplemented with, as requested,
Yes.
supplemented with native plantings, and it's done pretty extensively.
These flags, this was, is it a bank? My memory is that there was some, it was like a defined pool there?
There was, in fact, I think when the road was built 40 years ago, they lined it with some stone around the perimeter almost to
Yeah,
define
I
it.
think so.
But, yeah, so that is effectively where the wetland starts, I believe, right where the stones are.
Is it I don't think it's a big deal, but I'll ask you, would it be a big deal for you to put on your as-built, the flags? Just as in the numbers here.
Oh, just have them transfer those onto the,
Yes.
onto the as-built?
Onto the as-built.
Yeah, I think I could ask for that.
I think they can just put it on there, because I just want to make sure that what we're looking at here with your request for certificate of compliance, it reflects the flags that we have here on
In the
the
file.
approved plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they could do that.
All right, so,
Yeah, let's take a look at it on that sidewalk on that Saturday.
is that okay with you,
Shouldn't take
22nd
long.
of April? Saturday morning, 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock, take Jim is no hour.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure I can be there, does that, I'll do what I can.
It doesn't look like this is going to be.
Shouldn't be.
We fine-tooth combed this in our last site walk, yeah.
Yeah, it should be okay.
Do we, and I was wondering, do we really need a site walk?
Well, I'd like to see the plantings that were put in addition and just
Yeah,
check out
there
the
is
pipe.
a section here that on the approved plan that says landscape lawn to be supplemented with native plantings.
I remember that.
Section, yeah.
And we have I have a landscape plan that actually, if you want, if that would help, that identified, that I could identify what's in it.
Yeah.
It's in the hundreds, there's a lot of fern and things that have been planted there.
You have it with you?
I have a landscape plan with me, yeah.
Let's see it. That's great.
You don't want to see it anyway,
I
right?
tell, yeah.
She's still going to want to see it.
So-
Well, maybe Judith could go and
Interesting.
we could approve it subject to Judith seeing it.
If you'd rather, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a sidewalk anyway, maybe it's
Yeah.
not worth it, but
Yeah, okay. Well, it shouldn't take long.
there's the page that indicates. So this is basically the area there, so you can see
Yeah.
it's pretty densely planted with,
Right.
most of that is various species of fern.
Mhm.
And
Can you also send us a copy of the-
copy of the landscape plan?
Yeah.
I could probably cut that, yeah.
Just that part, yeah.
Actually, if you bring it to my office, I can make a copy.
All right. I'll
Yeah,
do
and
that.
then you could send it to us, Kathy, before the site walk. That would be
Yeah,
great.
it probably
Thank
won't be
you.
in column, but unless, do
Yeah.
you have this in a PDF that you can send?
I might be able
me?
to email it to you.
Oh, okay, then I can do it.
Yeah, I think I have a PDF on it.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions from commissioners? Any others, members of the public, comments, questions, suggestions? Hearing none, your assent will continue this to the 22nd?
On site?
All right, somewhere around 9 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Conservation Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is request for certificate of compliance, 540 Harlan Street. Hey, good evening again.
Good evening.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I'm Mary McKettrick, and I represent Todd Hamilton, who's the owner of 540 Harlan Street. I was in to see you in February for a discussion. I wanted some advice as to what the owner needed to do to obtain a certificate of compliance for some pretty old, by an enforcement order and then an order of conditions for his property. And you advised me that you had sufficient written material, but that you wanted a letter actually requesting a certificate of compliance, which I did write for the March meeting. March meeting was canceled, and we're here, so we're here tonight. So it's actually been 2 months since I've been here to discuss this, and I don't know how well you remember it, but what I submitted to you in February were various things that related to the original enforcement order and the documents that were submitted at that time. There was no formal engineer's planting plan, but there was a vegetation planting plan. That's this plan that you should have in your materials. In the original, there were various things that had to be done relating to the original, both the original enforcement order and then the order of conditions, which was a hearing that followed up from a previous owner had removed all of the trees on a lot of this property. So that goes back to, I don't know, 2009, maybe even earlier. I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
sure.
So-
Possibly John
I'd say
Kiernan was on the commission. I don't think
2007.
anyone else was at that time. So it's difficult because I'm talking about something that, none of you were here for, but I remember it. I was on the Board of Selectmen, and it was a big issue at the time. So,
The only time we've ever had a police cruiser at a sidewalk. That's the only time.
so then what happened was the property most of it was sold to Todd Hamilton. This was an open space development. The property, so trees had to be planted. There was an issue as to fill that had been put in and how it had been put in. There had to be, I believe, part of the enforcement order related to that. The bottom line is what we discussed in February, and Mr. Hamilton was here, is that all of that has been done long ago. And there were culverts and drains that had to be put under the driveway. That's been done. And in addition, trees have been planted and trees have been replanted because in some cases they've died. These are huge variety of pine trees for the most part. I don't know the exact types. So what was required in the order of conditions should be complete at this time. You haven't formally taken a site walk recently and looked at it, but you did look at it last year or 2 years ago, I guess it was last year, because we requested, and we had brought an ANRAD in here because Mr. Hamilton wanted to do a little additional paving on his driveway. So you approved that, and you said, well, you don't have to go through a formal order of conditions process or anything, but we want to come back and look at it when you're done. And he said in February that he still needs to plant the grass or wildflowers or whatever it is along the driveway, so he'd like you to come back and look at it when he's actually planted that. And it still wouldn't be planted now, even though today was really hot. We haven't had warm weather enough to complete that. So you need to come back for that. He's worried about getting the certificate of compliance because he's doing estate planning now, or family financial planning, and he needs to convey his house to a trust, but he can't do it because he's got an outstanding order of conditions. So when you discussed this in February, you said you thought you could grant a certificate of compliance. It wasn't clear to me whether you had to come back and look at the property before you did that, but there was also the other reason why you needed to go back to the property. So I wasn't sure how it was left. At that time, he thought you were going to do a partial certificate of compliance. I don't even know what that is, so I don't know if you do. So that he could go ahead.
Well, we've done those before.
You have.
Where there was a series of,
And then what would be the reasons, because you had to come back and look at the property, but you're going to do that anyway, aren't you, in the near future? You need to do some type of visit to the site.
well, what is he looking for?
He's looking for, he wants a certificate. Well, first of all, we were both concerned because there was an enforcement order that had never been removed, and it hadn't been concluded in any way, but we know that it was related. Reviewing all of these documents, it's clear that that enforcement order then led to, the way it normally does, to a hearing before the Conservation Commission, an order of conditions which was recorded. So now the order of conditions is what you have to look at in order to determine if he can get a certificate of compliance. That's my understanding now. I wasn't sure before I came to meet with you in February. Because I didn't know what happened with that. I don't know what happens with an enforcement order once it's been issued. I thought maybe you had to say that it was satisfied or something like that.
We've actually handled it differently over the last 25 years. Sometimes we just vote to extinguish it or vacate it.
Right.
Sometimes it's been wrapped into a notice of intent because if somebody needs to do something. Like I think originally, Mr. Petroselli came back to us with a notice of intent as to how he was to remove the fill. I do have a very clear memory as to what happened originally, and then the series of events, some of them being enforcement orders, some of them being notice of intent. And in my mind, it's all been complied with. The only thing that I think that we have not seen is the planting at where he was going to, I don't know, pave a portion of it, or plant grass in a portion of the driveway? Can it
The-
redirect the water?
Yeah, well, the issue was paving the rest of the driveway and where the water was going to go and how he's, so there's a plan that's been submitted to you, and he's supposed to have done it according to the plan, and he has to, the reason he didn't think he was ready for you to review it was that he hasn't actually planted the grass along one edge. It's kind of got weeds growing in it, but it hasn't really been planted, and he intends to do that. So he thought you might want to wait to look at that. So, for
No, I don't
example,
think we need to wait for that.
you know,
That's
or you
not
can
that
come, you can
significant.
look at it on the 22nd.
Yeah, we can look at it without
If you
that.
want to.
We don't,
Yeah,
Yeah,
We can
why don't we
see
look
it.
at it on the 22nd?
Yeah.
because
okay, all right.
I
It's
know
soon,
that the
so-
original enforcement order has been complied over a number of years, beginning with Mr. Petroselli, because he took out the original fill. If you're going into the driveway, into his house, it would be on the right side. I mean, that was pretty bad.
Yeah.
But Mr. Petroselli did take care of that. This is before Todd Hamilton even had the property.
I did review all that, I did go back and look at that, I wasn't familiar with the details, but, okay, so you can schedule a site walk, this will be kept open until the site walk, and
But
then you
we
can take.
vote on it.
April 22nd, yeah.
Okay, all right, terrific, thank you very much.
But look, we should do this one at 9, because if we're going
Yes,
from
right.
Hillside over to Harlem, that doesn't make sense.
So this one will be 9 o'clock. Okay, great, thank
So
you.
should 51 Highland be 9:30, or do you think it'll be?
Yes.
9:30 should do it, yeah.
Before you leave, Mary, are there any questions or comments from the butters or members of the public? Okay. So we'll see you on the 22nd at 9.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, next on the agenda is 593 Blue Hill Avenue, that we have received a request to continue that to the May hearing, which I presume we all assent. Next on the list, number 10, request for certificate of compliance at 610 Brush Hill Road, essentially the same area. And that, we have a request to continue that to the May hearing. We all assent to that? Yes?
Okay, those are two separate properties, or those,
They back up to each other, don't they?
But they are two separate.
Yes, they're two separate,
they were subdivided, right?
well, no, they just happen to.
Oh,
They're
okay.
budding, they just happen to be, yeah.
And then the next one is request for order of conditions extension, 999 Randolph Avenue, which is the Wollaston Golf Club. Hey, good evening, thanks for your patience.
So I'm Colin Goslin with Solitude Lake Management. I'm here for a 3-year extension for the current pond management at Wollaston Golf Club. If anyone's familiar with the project or
And this is all that you do is pond management?
Correct.
It's like a specialty?
mostly for curly leaf pondweed or Potamogeton crispus. It's an invasive aquatic plant found in all 6 ponds, so.
Now, is this just your regular request for extension, or is this under the extension provision?
Yeah, just a regular. I know it was extended under the Permanent Extension Act till April 19th of this month, obviously a week or so, so.
And are you looking for,
Actually, I think this does fall in the act, because the file number 225, that was put into a new file. Remember Kelly came here with that machine with the tires and all that? And I think that does fall within the date. But the original one was 225, but then they updated it. The way they were cleaning out the ponds.
yes, no, I remember.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Oh, when you said the tires, I didn't know what you were talking about. You mean the machine that goes into the
That
pond?
crazy machine, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Oversized tires.
Yeah,
Okay,
we-
now I know what you're talking about. I didn't know.
We had an amendment for a hydro raking project
Yes.
on one of the
Yes,
smaller
yeah.
ponds, which we performed, I believe, must have been 5+ years ago. So this would just be a request for the original to be extended.
But are you asking for that request under the DEP issued an order
See, this is
some
the
years ago?
date.
All right, so that anything after 2009 got an automatic extension, but is that still, or because we've already extended it once under that?
Yes.
Not this one.
Not this.
I talked to Kelly today.
And she said, what?
She said that this 396 replaced the 225. Because the 225 has continued since, what, 98?
Yeah, it must have been, before my time.
And this is 396. And it says here that we issued a certificate of compliance August 26, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we continue a certificate of compliance?
I don't know.
I've never heard of that.
No, I've never heard of that either.
I tell you why I'm concerned with it. I mean, if it's automatic and you're entitled to it, then obviously you'll get it. But my concern is if there have been, or I assume there have been changes in some kind of the aquatic management and, I don't know if you're using the
Oh,
same
yeah,
chemicals.
yeah.
Are there different chemicals now being used? Are the MSDS, is that data is that the same?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it hasn't changed since, obviously, 2013. I don't know if it was amended. I'm not positive.
What was amended?
The original, or the order of conditions, was it amended in 2013?
Well, that, at least on the outside, it says that we issued a certificate of compliance. Yeah, that's what you were talking about?
That's not
Did you say
Yep.
that?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You
That's
probably
our
tried it,
company.
Right?
A while back, but I don't.
Yeah.
That-
I
that's
remember
pretty-
that, yeah.
That's pretty good. So we've got an order of conditions. This is strange.
Here's the act.
So- Establishing an automatic 4-year extension to certain permits and licenses concerning the use or development of real property. With limited exceptions, the act automatically extends for 4 years beyond its otherwise applicable expiration date. Permit or approval that was in effect or existence during the qualifying period beginning on August 15, 2008, and extending through August 15, 2012. Well, that would certainly govern order of conditions, which was issued and I signed it 12/14/2009. So that qualifies for that. But the problem is, the order of conditions issued in 2009 is kind of trumped, because on August 26th, 2013, we signed a certificate of compliance. And we checked off that, complete certification is hereby certified that the work regulated by the above referenced order of conditions has been satisfactorily completed. So it sounds to me that it's over. I mean, that's what we issued.
I mean, we've filed DEP permits, and obviously we can't get a DEP permit unless we have a current order of conditions, so I know.
So then we have to
See
go back
this,
down to
John?
225.
Yeah.
Which is what he's requesting.
But what's the
It's odd,
225?
isn't it?
The order of conditions from 2009 is 396.
I should have brought it with me, I apologize.
This is a 225. This is not pad.
Now,
this is
isn't
pad
this something
3.
that you'll continue to do over the next 5 years and in the future?
Yes.
So it never will be completed, per se?
Correct.
So it
That doesn't make any sense, though.
It's-
because-
doesn't make sense to have this as completed.
Well, it sounds like they might have to file a new, maybe the commission made them file a new order of conditions, so they had to close out the old one.
That would be
It's-
what I would
This is like
expect.
maintenance work. There will always
Yes.
be something going on, you know?
But the problem is, that this goes back to all of the representations about the chemical analysis and the
Yeah.
use of chemicals goes back to
2009.
2009.
Mhm.
That's a long time ago. because the chemicals
Yeah.
change. I don't know if what was permitted here is the same set of chemicals that you're using now.
Yep, it's mainly a fluoridone. It's a very low toxicity herbicides used in all the ponds except for the irrigation pond, the copper. It's the same MSDS sheets that have been used for a while now. Same as 2009. The label has not changed.
See, it's a certificate of compliance, but not completion. It will never be completed.
Well, it says it was completed right there.
Well-
I think that's what we're doing, check.
That's why I think it's on the folder, the 225.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. What I'm looking for is the chemical use.
Now, do you usually put those donations every year, or is that a special thing?
Yeah, I mean, we do it all over New England.
No, but do you do it Wallace every year? or-
We've done it twice. So it's kind of, in the catch basin, it kind of collects sediment, fluvial
Can you see if you
deposition.
can pick up
so-
the chemical that they're talking about in this one?
Chemical, that's for you,
Oh.
Ingrid.
My name?
Yes.
Oh, Colin Goslin.
There's plenty of copies of this, for sure. I'm sorry to hold you up, but here's a
It's fine.
letter from Kelly asking for the certificate of compliance.
Could that have been when the hydro raking work was completed?
2013.
It was. It said, "This work included removal of dense aquatic vegetation, leaf litter, and other accumulated organic debris using a hydro rake."
Correct.
But it's closing out 396.
Yeah.
So, what is the request for? Doesn't say. So what is your understanding, Kathy? The extension goes for 4 years, but can they do it again? Because this extension was 4/14/2010.
That's why I called Kelly. I could not find the extension that went to 2017. Because it can only be extended every 3 years. Where's this?
What is this in here for? That, I just pulled this out of this file. That's the educational NEP.
I was looking for that.
That's where it is. Wallace.
I put it in the wrong folder. Where's, this sheet, the sign up? Because that has a little extension, but I have the wrong number on it. So the reason I called is the date cannot be more than 3 years from the expiration date of the order condition. So this one went to 2010,
I
so,
don't see that this NOI has got the identification of the chemical waste.
Oh, it must. I don't know if that one.
so that's
Is
why
this
I don't have
the
anything other than that. So if it
225?
can't go for 3 years, it should expire.
This one I think this is the hydro
From
rating
the
one.
expiration
There's a
date is
different one.
There's a different one.
Which is
Yes.
put into 2010, right?
Right.
This is the wrong one. That doesn't have the identification of the chemical.
Yeah, this is,
It's, it may be in the order itself. You can take, this is 396. Take a look at that one.
So I went to ask Kelly, she said, oh, no, we transferred that into
that-
that one.
296.
Yeah,
That-
but
that
it
doesn't
doesn't
work.
seem it works either.
You know,
Because you have to have
I
the
hate
dates.
When form, it looks like form over substance here,
yep.
but this one was extended in 2010, and it's only good for 3 years.
Right.
So apparently Kelly's position is she's trying to put this order onto that one, but that's closed. So,
So I know right before I came, I should have brought it, but I looked up the current order of conditions that we had. It was an extension, or it's from the permanent extension, and it was due to expire this April.
Can you email that to me? I tried to get
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yep.
You never returned my phone call?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of filling in for him, so,
Yeah, if you can send it to me, then we can bring it up at the sidewalk.
okay.
yeah, I hate to,
So just my concern is that if it expires, we won't be able to get it extended.
It's the same one in this file too. Same one.
well, that's where I got that from, that file that you've got. I know, there's a copy of it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make any sense, because it should be, you know, chemical analysis, MSDS material,
Right.
specifications, half-life, all that stuff. And it actually may be in here somewhere, but this one doesn't help. So at the risk of sounding like I am putting procedure over substance, is there any way, and we'll try to do, what's the expiration date, the 17th?
I believe the 17th, so today's.
But are you planning on doing anything?
No, we don't do anything till late May.
So if we could get more information on this
I can,
before the 22nd, we can actually put it on the agenda for the 22nd, because we'll be in public session,
okay.
and try to get it resolved with that. But what we need is how we get from 2010, because we don't have the authority to extend that one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's only good for 3 years.
Right,
So we're
So
off by
we're
a
missing the
mile.
2013
yeah.
extension.
Which
So if you can get,
we
if you
have
can
that.
get that back to Kathy
Mhm.
in time for the meeting on the 22nd, we can probably resolve it.
Okay, so even if it's expired, you will extend it?
Well, we can do it nook pro tunk.
Yes.
All right?
That's what I've read. All right, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, thanks. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Fine.
Is that for me?
Copy the same one, yeah.
Yeah, but if you can, I think it all belongs in that same folder.
Oh, okay.
You just slide that. Beautiful.
Okay, and that's, okay.
All right, so that takes us to request to prune vegetation Pine Tree Brook. Anybody, you are the patient one. Oh, thank you for your patience.
I actually only discovered when I saw the first agenda item that this was at the end of your agenda, so I thought I'd stay. And I'll be very brief. This is, as you know, we had come and
Just
spoke.
identify yourself,
Sorry,
Ian.
this is Ian Cook with the Neponset Watershed Association. We had come and spoken to you in general terms about a project we've been working on for a while now to try to modify 3 dams on Pine Tree Brook to enhance trout habitat along the brook. And we're continuing to work on that. We've actually put together a notice of intent for you, which is sitting with DCR at the moment, waiting for their approval. And as we've gotten into this, we have discovered that one of the 3 dams is arguably somewhat historic. And DCR has asked us to do some historic research on it before we make any modifications to it. And as part of that, they want to have the DCR archaeologists come out and just do sort of a visual survey of the area we'll be disturbing. And she had requested that we prune the miscellaneous vegetation near the existing breach on this dam. So it's mostly, small buckthorn, no cutting of trees. This is, our environmental scientist who's a botanist with some hand clippers, pretty minor kind of thing.
Where is that dam, Ian?
It's what we're now calling the oh God, I can't remember the name of it now. It's too late. It's the middle one. It's just downstream of
Not
Unquity
Tillingsworth?
Road. What's that?
Not Tillingsworth?
No, this is Tileston and Hollingsworth, that's the big one. This is a little tiny one on.
It's on Pine Tree Brook
On Pine Tree Brook.
itself.
It's not the flood control dam upstream of Unquity Road. It's the little tiny one called, we're calling it Harling's Mill, the Harling's Mill Dam, which is just downstream of Unquity Brook. You've probably never noticed it unless you've really gone looking for it.
I think there's a picture there.
Is there? Yeah, I'm curious as to the location.
There is a picture in the little package here. And it's just the last.
In March, so you might not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Let me check. I should
Yeah,
have
so
that too.
So basically, the very last page is a picture of the existing breach of this dam where it's failed. And basically, what we'll be doing is just moving the rocks around in sort of the center of the picture to adjust the water levels and make it more fish passable. So the trimming we're talking about is, some of the little scraggly stuff on the right there, and some of the smaller things on the left, just so that the archaeologists can get a good look at the ground and make sure there's not anything hiding there that nobody's noticed.
I had a question, and now I can't find the reference to it, but there was something that you were trying to improve visual access. I don't know why I wrote the.
Well, it's visual access for the archaeologist specifically. It's not
Right.
like the public to be able to.
All right, but
to see it.
then when I looked at the picture, the question that I wrote, and I read this a long time ago, but the picture looks like visual access is easy.
Yes. We've had a long-running debate with the DCR archaeologists about how much is appropriate to clear here, and she tends to want to clear everything, and we've been trying to say, well, if we do it before it leafs out and we can just trim a few little things, then we won't have to do too much and we won't get in trouble with the Concom. And she seems to have gone along with that idea.
So that's a 200 square foot area?
Yeah, at most.
Question, Ian, do you recall, I was curious and wonder if you recall what the historic aspects of this dam are?
Well, and there's some debate about this, and DCR has essentially asked us to hire a professional historian to look into it. There's some research that suggests that this mill might have been owned by a gentleman named Harland, and it may go as far back as the 1700s. But it's clearly been modified a lot over the years, and the historian that DCR asked us to hire to look into it is now kind of debating whether it even was this guy's mill. But we're trying to get to the bottom of that before we mess with anything.
So basically, you want to improve life access upstream?
Yes, it's both, exactly. So the fish, so right now, there's a population of wild brook trout upstream of the Harlan Street Flood Control Dam, the big one you see as you go up Unquity Road. And we'd like to be able to extend the habitat range for those fish downstream by allowing them to pass these three structures.
That makes sense, but I've got two questions. First one, is that going to be part of your notice of intent?
Yes, that's what the notice of intent is all about, like actually modifying these three structures to accomplish that.
This.
Yeah, we just sort of felt like, as out of an abundance of caution, we said we wanted to say, well, let's just ask the Concom, if they have any objection to us trimming a little bit so the archaeologists can see what she's doing.
And I guess now I've got three, but my second question is, about a year and a half ago, we did a site walk with some kind of a dam study
Hmm.
group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where are they and what's your relationship to them?
That was us, although there was a slightly.
You're having students
From Northeastern. right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, students from, actually from Wentworth Institute
That
of
was it,
Technology.
Wentworth, yeah.
So it's all the same project, and the students have done what they're gonna do, and we're now, hopefully very soon, ready to come back to you with the final proposal for what we'd like to do.
All right. That stuff all makes sense to me. What doesn't make, I found why I wrote the note. And it says here that the DCS staff archaeologist has agreed to do this work, but has requested that we prune some of the vegetation on and near the dam back so that she can get a better view of the site and capture the photographs that she needs. And yet, I'm looking at photographs
Which are
that
excellent.
seem to depict exactly, I have no idea why she needs pruning. Do you?
Not particularly, but she has the authority, basically, she's got to approve what we want to do here from a historic standpoint, and she insists that there needs to be some pruning. So our thought was,
Will that
okay,
be
we'll go do
the
just a little tiny bit of
investigation?
pruning. What's that?
Will that be the extent of her investigation, or?
Well, she's doing the visual inspection, and then we have this other person who's doing essentially background research on deeds and so on and so forth.
And who's doing the pruning again, Ian? Who's doing that?
It's actually being done by Chris Hirsch, who's our staff environmental scientist, who's a botanist.
Okay. And knows good stuff from bad stuff and can be
Oh, yeah.
discreet.
Absolutely.
And how much, we've had some odd encounters with the archaeological group. We've had to cut down trees because they didn't want us to put a bike path over the top of some long buried house foundation. It was in the bike path down by the Neponset, just on the south side of Blue Hill Avenue. And to this day, I have no idea why we had to move the bike path away from the river and cut down trees. Because an archaeologist said, oh, you can't have a bike path over. Underneath the ground there, somewhere down there is the foundation of a house.
They wanted to cut down trees on the riverbank?
That was,
The archaeologists required that?
There's definitely a tension between the historical goals and
Sure
the
is.
environmental goals. And honestly, I find the historical permitting process somewhat mysterious, but we're trying to sort of make everybody happy and come up with a compromise that's not too invasive.
Odious.
200 square feet. So is that, what do you envision? Is it, are we cutting a pathway through to the dam from the road?
No, it's basically the area immediately in that picture. So as you can see, there's not a lot to really cut there. But there are some areas where, on the right of that picture, you sort of see there's some kind of tangly vines,
Yeah,
and
they
those
may
are
wanna
actually
get
hanging over
different shots.
a former piece of the dam.
She may want
And when
the
were
dam.
these pictures taken?
These would have been, I think, shortly before we submitted this, which is a month or more ago, maybe 6 weeks ago
Yeah, so
now.
that whole area could be completely overgrown in another month. You know,
Right,
you
that's
could
why
have-
we're trying to do this quickly.
You could have plants that have grown 6 feet and,
Right.
yeah, so.
So where does the pruning, does it occur all along this path?
No, it's just right around here. This is sort of near this dot is kind of the area that would be modified to accommodate the fish, so that's really the area of interest.
Wow, okay. I'm not overwhelmed by the need for this, but as long as it's pruning as opposed to clear cutting?
Absolutely. We're not going to have chainsaw. This is literally, our environmental scientist is going to have some little hand loppers and say, okay, I'll move this little thing. There's no trees are going to be harmed, and mostly what's going to be involved here is buckthorn, frankly.
Good, get it out of there.
Sounds like she doesn't want to get scratched as she walks in.
Yeah. Hey,
All
I
right,
just
well,
pruned
then-
my
all right.
raspberries.
All right, any comments, questions, suggestions, any comments from the butters, members of the public?
Go for it.
Okay, all right, as long as there are no, do you agree, as long as no trees are getting cut down,
I agree.
right? All right, so you want to make the motion? You're the soft guy. Yeah.
So, Judith does this time. Go ahead, Judith. You make the motion.
Motion
Second.
to allow.
To allow the pruning without eliminating any trees.
As proposed.
Fair
right.
enough.
All right.
Except for those damn
Any
buck
discussion? All in favor? All right, all opposed, any opposed, none opposed?
thorns.
We're
Okay.
in.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
and
Thank
thank
you.
you for your motion about the PCBs earlier. That's very encouraging to us.
Oh, good, that's good. Yeah, what do you think about backfilling those cores?
I think, I guess my reaction is that I think people assume the sediments in the river are a lot more stable than they actually are. Some of the USGS work and other work that Division of Ecological Restoration did suggests that there's actually a lot of movement of that sediment, and that the sediment concentrations may in fact be quite different now. And the fact that Mother Brook is cleaned up is really good, because I think what was happening historically was every time there was a big storm, a slug of new stuff would come down from Mother Brook, and the stuff that was, at T&H and at Baker would blast on down. So it may be that the levels are lower. I guess I'm not overly concerned about that, because I feel like it's pretty mucky stuff they're getting into, and it's pretty much gonna.
Depends on the size of the core and the depth.
Back together.
I mean,
Yeah.
In still water versus currents.
The
Yeah,
PCBs.
but this is a current where they're gonna test it.
Well,
Oftentimes they pool where they get pushed by the current, and where they wind up can sometimes be pretty stable water.
Yeah, and the stuff they're really going to be sampling, it's very, very fine organic sediment that the PCBs like to attach themselves to, so it's really sort of fine, gelatinous kind of mud that you're going to find in PCBs.
And are you aware of the location of the smelt hatchery?
Oh, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
in fact,
Right there.
The big focus of the community advisory group we did a few years ago on the dams was to try to come up with a different approach to dealing with that problem, because there was sort of one camp that said, oh, no, we like the dam, so we have to have a fish ladder, which means building a huge structure right on top of the smelt habitat. And then the other camp said, oh, no, the best thing for the fish is just to take the dam out. And basically our political leaders said, we have to come up with basically 100% agreement before they're going to help move anything forward. So we did come up with an alternative, which basically puts at the Baker Dam, partially preserves the Baker Dam and puts what's called a nature-like fishway within the footprint of the existing pond, specifically so that it won't harm the smelt. So that's definitely, for us,
are they both DCR dams?
they are both DCR dams. And the upper one, the Tileston and Hollingsworth Dam, I don't know if anybody's seen it lately, it's really in terrible, terrible condition. It can't, the water level won't stay up. Essentially, the dam has rusted through and the river's going through the dam rather than over it.
That would definitely change the PCB content or the
Yes,
accumulated on
I
the upstream
suspect
side.
with the PCBs, I mean, we actually talked with DEP
Probably
about,
flush.
well, is the fact that DCR is not maintaining that dam, actually a release of PCBs? And DEP didn't want to go there, but.
I'm sure they had it inspected, and I'm sure they have the inspection reports that show it's stable. Oh, wait, DCR also handles that, don't they?
They do.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
Yes, yeah, for sure. That, I think, concludes our business. Any other additional business?
Just, I'm not sure what this means.
What is it?
It's that
I wasn't
Milton
sure either.
Land conversation.
Oh, the three signatures on it?
Yeah, I saw it. I wasn't sure what it was either.
Oh, maybe we can just read it into the record.
But
What?
it doesn't make sense as it's read. Well, read it, John, and see if
Yeah.
it makes sense. It doesn't make sense.
Well, this is
It's a
apparently
sentence.
from the Milton Land Conservation Trust.
Mhm.
March 23rd, 2017, the Milton Land Conservation Trust supports the concept that development of the Carberry property along Canton Avenue includes preservation of the open fields visible from Canton Avenue and maximization of open space within the project. And it's signed by John Cronin, trustee, Ted Wendell, trustee, and Peter Jeffries, consultant.
Are they saying that it should include or they would only support it if it does include?
I thought it was ambiguous too, but why don't we put this in the folder for when that comes
Okay.
before us?
So it's basically saying they support the project?
Support the concept.
The concept.
Okay, we'll just put in the, I just didn't know.
It's quite
Of
ambiguous.
including preservation of the open fields. Yeah, that's the beginning of what will be a long dialogue.
All right.
And an important one too, that's a remarkable piece of property.
It is, it's a beautiful property.
Gorgeous. Oh.
All right, so we'll see everybody on the 22nd.
Aye, aye, sir.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.